So today's Cardinal lesson is the first in a series of 8. So we've never done a series before. There's going to be 8 episodes. And today's episode, episode 1, is really going to give you the overall picture of why does this thing take 8 sessions. And when we do a financial plan, I'm going to introduce you to Tom and Susan. And we've got 7 worries, which are right here: Social Security, Medicare, long-term care, IRA, 401k, income and investment, estate planning, and taxes. We apply all 7 of these to every client that we bring in that does a financial plan with us. And so today we're doing episode 1, which is going to give you an overview of the whole picture. The next 7 episodes are going to take each individual worry and dig deep into that. And I think you're going to like it. So, Tom?
Yeah, I mean we're doing this video because we talk about financial planning in all our videos, how we need to do this as part of a larger plan, and it sounds great, but people don't really know, and you might not really know what we mean by that. And so we want to show you over these next 8 videos of what that process really looks like, take you through a case study of people and clients that you might be able to see yourself in, so you can see how we arrive at the recommendations we do on each of these 7 subjects. So, like Hans mentioned today, we're going to go through it, give you sort of the big picture, give you big sort of, we're going to end with the video with the summary of all the recommendations. But in every subsequent video, we're going to get into real detailed on each one and walk you through sort of how we arrived at these recommendations. And so let me bring up the show notes here. Again, you can find this at the link below our video. It's also on our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board, and then we actually have a copy of a plan, a written plan. This is, if you did a plan with us, you would get something similar to this, just to see what these recommendations are. I'm not going to go over it right now. We'll do that in more detail on future videos, but that's really what we want to accomplish today. So I'm going to turn it back to Hans. He's going to give you a little bit of background of these clients, and then we're going to get into and show you what that process actually looks like.
Okay, so we met Tom and Susan 3 years ago. And when they were turning 65, when Tom was turning 65 and going on Medicare. And he's been watching our videos for, 3 years, 4 years, maybe several years before that. And he's just now getting ready to retire. Susan's work history, she's pretty much been, Tom's an MD, retiring. Susan worked before they had kids. She really didn't work much after that. So she's going to be relying on Tom's work history when it comes to Social Security. But from the moment Tom and I meet you in that first phone conversation that we have with you, with any client coming in, we're seeing a picture of these 7 subjects, 7 worries, 7, and these 7 subjects are going to be, if we ultimately do a plan for you, they're going to be the top individual subtopics of the plan. And when I first meet you, I'm seeing these 7 subjects and I'm asking questions, learning about you. So I want to introduce you today to Tom and Susan, and I want to do it subject by subject. So as far as Social Security, Tom's plan before he really came in to see us has been to delay till 70. He didn't need the money. He was retiring at 68. And even at 68, he wouldn't need the money early in retirement because he's got plenty of money. And he just wanted to get to the biggest possible check. Susan, on the other hand, they had pretty much figured out that her Social Security check was going to be small until Tom files. And then when Tom files, she's going to get 50% of his check in addition. So she's going to get the spousal benefit. We knew we had to look at Social Security taxes because they're going to have a high other income. And then we needed to look at when one of them passes away with estate planning. I mean, what's they're going to go down to one check, and which check is it, and how are they going to live off of that? As far as Medicare, we already took care of that for them. They're both on Plan Gs. Medicare supplements, they stayed on original Medicare. They didn't buy Medicare Advantage. He's an MD. He didn't want managed care. He didn't want somebody telling him where he has to go to the hospital or which doctor he has to go to. He didn't want a network. But that's already taken care of. We got into the IRMAA, which is under Medicare. He's paying substantial. They're paying for both of them substantial IRMAA because his income is high, and we're we're going to show during the series how we're going to plan the IRMAA appeal. As far as long-term care, Tom's mother had Alzheimer's, as well as Susan's mom. Um, they still hadn't bought long-term care insurance. He really thought he had enough money; they'll just pay for it. Um, but when you're going to look in the final plan, we impressed upon them he had enough IRA money. We're going to take a chunk of the IRA money and fund long-term care insurance. IRA 401ks, Tom's RMD is in 5 years, Susan's in 6 years. They don't have any Roth right now. Um, well, they have a little bit, and we're gonna look at Roth conversions. Um, where these people are charitable inclined. So we're going to show them QCDs starting after 70, where they're going to donate money out of the Roth IRA. We get into the income, and frankly, a lot of people, when they think financial planning and they think Cardinal, they think this is all we do. Is we help you invest your money, we create an income out of that, we cash flow it. I mean, all the stuff that's in here. Um, they're thinking that this is all Cardinal does. And this is a piece of what we do. It's a central piece. It's a big concern of Tom and Susan, but Tom's going to get in and show you there's going to be a lot of emphasis on this, but it really is the effect of all seven things. And then we get into estate planning. I mean, we got to look the first benefactor of an estate when you've got a married couple is the surviving spouse. There's a lot of things that happen after the first person that dies. I mean, people go in the single taxpayer or the widow's tax, so they're going to go to the single tax filer brackets. IRMAA gets cut in half, the IRMAA thresholds. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on. One of the Social Security checks disappears. So we got to plan for that spouse that survives or outlives the other one. And then overall estate planning, these people have a desire to leave a nice estate to their children and grandchildren. And that's a priority, Tom and Susan do. And then taxes. I mean, I already talked about the widow's tax, and they have a desire to stay below IRMAA, and that's going to be a competing thing with the IRA. So that just gives you a little picture of Tom and Susan that we learned during the fact finding. Now I want to push it to Tom. I want Tom to comment a little bit on that, and then Tom's going to jump into Right Capital, and he's going to show you what Tom and Susan's money looks like.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very typical client profile of people who are coming in, right? They're sort of right at retirement, maybe a little sooner, maybe a little later, just depending on sort of their situation. But they have all these questions and they've thought about some of this stuff, but they've never really sat down and put it all together. Because as you'll see as we go through all these videos, is they all interact with each other, right? One decision in one area impacts, five or six of the other sections that we have on the board here. And so what we're doing as part of this planning process is looking at it all, right? We start with sort of where they're at, what their goals are, what their assumptions are in different things. Like I want to know where you are from a starting point and how open are you to looking at different solutions or pushing back there. And some people have a really firm, like Social Security is a good one. Like some people come in very steadfast in what they want to do. And they say, I don't care what you show me, this is what I'm doing. Say, okay, well, we'll adjust the plan accordingly. So we're never going to say you have to do this. It's either take it at all or take none of it, right? We work with you. It's a collaborative approach to build out this plan. Most people come in with an open mind. They're coming to us because they want to know what we have to say. And so we can work together to create the sort of final plan that makes the most sense for them. So again, everyone's situation is different. Everyone plans looks different, right? Because of what their goals are and what their needs are different from person to person. But this will give you a picture, a good picture of how we approach the planning process and what that process actually looks like for you if you were to reach out and do a plan for us. And so what I want to do initially is bring you into, I'll share my screen. We're going to bring you into Right Capital. This is the software that we use to do a lot of the planning. This in and of itself is not the final plan. But again, it's a tool that we use to help write the plan that we're doing. It helps us do forward-looking projections, helps us do tax Roth conversions and things like that. So typically what we do with the plan is we come in we've talked over a couple of meetings, we've learned about you, we've talked about how we can help, and you say, okay, let's move forward with the plan. We collect all your documents, all your statements, your income, your expenses. We get a real good picture of what your current situation is, and we plug it in here. And so that's what I'm going to walk through somewhat quickly, because we got to get through everything today. And again, in future videos, we'll dig more in depth on each piece. So this front page just gives you a nice snapshot of kind of where they're starting at, right? So they have about 230,000 in cash. So this is money that's already been taxed. They've built up the savings in preparation for retirement, thinking they're delaying Social Security. We'll get to that in a second. So they got about 230 in cash, and then they have several $1 million in investments. So within the investments, we can break it down by account, right? So he has a traditional IRA. It could be in a 401k still, but what we can do is actually plug in the actual holdings that he has, right? So we actually look to see what your investments are. We plug it in. That helps us determine how much risk you're taking. How aggressive are you being? Is it too much? Project future returns on these accounts. We plug in the holdings. Right Capital, we put in the quantity of each holding, and Right Capital will follow that investment over time. And so as the market moves, because the next day those investments will be worth slightly different. As the market moves, the software will account from the price of yesterday's close. So it's not live data, but it's pretty close. So he's got about 1.7 in traditional IRA. We have just under 400,000 in a taxable brokerage account. So again, this is money that's already been taxed. It's subject to capital gains. So you'll notice we put it in a cost basis. So the software will account for any capital gains that are being generated when we sell those positions. Susan has a small amount in an IRA, about 100,000 in a traditional IRA. Again, we've plugged in all the holdings there that you can see. And then he does have some Roth money. So he has about 500,000 of Roth, which is not nothing, which is good, right? So he has some flexibility, some choice of where to pull money from. But again, we've plugged that in there. So all in, they have about 2.7 in investments, another 230 or so in cash. They're in a pretty good spot. We go through, they paid everything off. So if you had a mortgage, we could plug that in there, but they don't. They paid all their homes off. They don't have any car notes or anything like that. So loans are zero. And they have two properties. So they have their primary residence valued at 850, and then a mountain home valued at 600,000, a vacation home. One of the things you'll notice is we do plug in property taxes and insurance. We account for those expenses separately than later on. So we'll get to that in a second. But the point I just want to make out is when we have expenses accounted for here, we don't want to double count it later. So again, that's sort of their snapshot. That's where they're starting in a pretty good spot. Now we get into sort of their goals. And so again, Tom's goal is to retire in October of this year, 2026. And Susan, we've just tied her retirement date to his retirement date because it flows through on other parts of the software. At the end of the day, she's not working, so it doesn't really matter a whole lot. But again, he's retiring in October. They want to spend this number, and this is what I pointed out earlier, where we have the taxes and insurance help handle separately. Right now, we've plugged in 7,400 a month here. In reality, we have them modeling. We've modeled them spending closer to 10,500 a month, which is what they really like to spend. But we have other expenses accounted for in the software. We have the property tax, the insurance. We have health insurance accounted for separately. So I'll show you later in the software where it adds it all together. But total spending they have after tax, 10,500 in today's dollars, and then we inflate that for the future. We have healthcare cost. One of the things that you'll notice is this 1,800. This isn't that doesn't seem that high. That is only accounting for their Medicare supplement price and maybe some out-of-pocket costs for medications. The software estimates their Part B of Medicare, so it's estimating IRMAA. So we'll, again, in the Medicare video, we'll dig more into that. But Medicare will charge you more for your Medicare Part B premium if you've earned over higher amounts. The software accounts for all of that, and so we'll get to that later. And then we have a long-term care cost. So it's in the goal section. The goal is not to need long-term care, but we want to illustrate the risk if you do need long-term care. What we default to is using the national average for home health care. This is not 24/7 home health care, but again, we've modeled $75,000 a year in today's dollars being spent on care, and then we inflate that cost uh, into the future. We look at their income. So again, uh, both of them are on Social Security or haven't started Social Security. They're thinking about it. His benefit at 68, which would be soon, is about 4,300 a month, just under that. And again, in this video of Social Security, we'll get more into those details. And then Susan's, again, she worked earlier in her career, mostly was a stay-at-home mom. So her check based off her own record is much smaller, $800 a month, almost $900 a month. The software does all the calculations for the spousal benefit. Again, we'll get into that later. And then again, he's an MD. He's making good money right now. His current salary is about 615. That obviously stops when he retire, and so we need to account for sort of how we replace the income at that point. Uh, Savings currently, he's adding money into his Roth 401k. That's how he's built up that 500,000 or so in Roth money. So we have that modeled, and again, the spending. This is pre-retirement spending. We've just matched that to be the same. Essentially, again, showing 10,500 a month on into the future. Again, the profile, we just look at their ages. So Tom's birthday, July 2nd, 58. So he'll be turning 68 in July. And then Susan is currently 66 with her birthday in October. She'll be turning 67 in October. The other thing I'll point out is we have a planning horizon to 95. So we want to plan for a long life. We want to make sure we don't run out of money at some point. Later in the software, we can play around with looking at different dates and see how that impacts stuff. But that's our default planning time horizon is age 95. So I went through that very quickly. When we're doing a plan with you, we do it much slower. We'd actually be looking at your particular stuff, but then we just have a lot to get through today. So I'm gonna keep going. And again, we're not going to get into a lot of details on this call in this video because we have other future videos where we'll dive into the all the how we got to the recommendations. But we spend a lot of time in this retirement tab. This is where it runs through what's called a Monte Carlo simulation. Uh, Again, Monte Carlo simulations exist because we're trying to predict the future, which obviously we can't do. We don't have a crystal ball, but we also can't assume that the stock market's going to go up in a straight line, 8% a year every year between now and 95, right? That's not realistic either. So, what the Monte Carlo does is it randomizes return assumptions on your investments over the next, from now till 95. And it does that exercise 1,000 different times and it's all random. So it gives us a good picture of what the possible outcomes are. Their current plan is 98%, so not a bad starting point, right? So if they never met us, they're probably going to be okay. But they're coming here because they have questions. They want to make it better based off the recommendations we made. This is the proposed plan. We're up to 100%. Again, we'll get into more specifics of those as we go through this series of videos. But just know that's one of the things that we're looking at. We're not all doing all our planning around the Monte Carlo simulation, but it is a helpful tool to give us a sense of where we stand. Some of the things we can see here is we can play around with the different assumptions. Again, the Roth conversions we'll get to later. We have the investment section. We can play around with ages and stuff. So there's a lot of flexibility in the software that we play around with when we're actually doing a plan. Today, I'm going to sort of gloss over that, and we get more into that later on in future videos. Again, we have cash flows. This cash flows page, I spent a lot of time on this one because this gives me a really good picture year by year how things are going. Right. So if we look at 2026 and in each sort of column, I can click and drop down and see more details on here. We have their salary. Again, he's working a partial year this year, so he doesn't get the full salary. Social Security. In the Social Security video, we'll get to how we recommended this, but what their end goal here is we're going to actually recommend that Tom file for benefits at Susan's full retirement age. Again, we'll talk more about that later. But so we see some Social Security coming in. And some of the recommendations we have is some annuities uses there. So we'll get to that later. But we have income coming in. We have Social Security. We have the total spending. Part of the spending number, you say, if you look at that, so that's higher than 10,500. That's because we've modeled a long-term care policy in there. So that's separate from their total spending. But if you look at living, housing, healthcare, and vacation, those numbers all added together is about 10,500. So you can check that on your own. And then we have tax payments because this spending number is the after tax number. We need to pay taxes to get there. And this is where this tax payment this tax column comes into play. One thing to note is this is inclusive of Roth conversions. I'll look at that in a second, and then we'll sort of wrap up a little bit here. But this number, this tax payment is after we've done some Roth conversions. So some of these taxes are because of the Roth conversions, not just their total spending. But we'll get to that later. But again, it's very powerful software. We can do a lot of projections. I can model vacations. I can model moving, home purchases. I can model paying for grandkids' college. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can model in here. And again, everyone's situation is different. What their goals are different. And we take what your goals are and we model them appropriately in here. some other tools in the software. So sort of the investments, you can sort of see what kind of rate of return we're assuming. We do err on the side of being very conservative with our return assumptions. Again, we don't want to overpromise returns and build a plan off of really, rosy picture from a return standpoint. So we have a very conservative approach to that. Their current allocation is about 55% equity, about 45% fixed income. The average annual rate of return we're assuming on that is about 4%. Our recommendation is to go a little bit more aggressive, but that's paired with the use of annuities. We'll get to that later. And so they're getting a closer to a 6% return on average. Again, I know that's conservative. We'd rather be conservative. If you have higher returns, great. If you have lower returns, we've been conservative at the start, so it's not impactful there. So that we can look at sort of investment performance there. Taxes, we spend a lot of time on this tax tab. This is where we can model Roth conversions, so tax strategy, calibration. These are the blue area is without doing the conversions, the green area is with doing conversions. I'll sort of jump to the conclusion is what we're recommending for them is some amount of Roth conversions, but up to a point that we can stay below that IRMAA level. That's a very common pain point that a lot of clients have is they've gotten this letter about IRMAA, or maybe we taught them about IRMAA, and now they're trying to avoid it. Not every time is that reasonable. Sometimes you need to pay some level of IRMAA. In their situation, they wanted to see if they could avoid it. We were able to work out a way to keep them below those levels. So the goal, what we have modeled in the software, is converting up to the point where they're not having to pay any extra for Medicare. So I know I'm going quickly. We're going to have more videos where we dig really into the details on some of this stuff. Before I get to sort of the summary page here that we're going to look at, Hans, are there anything else you want me to show while we're in here looking at all this stuff?
Well, I mean, I'm just struck by, like normally with clients, when we're doing this introductory video, we get stuck right here because they want to see the various levels of Roth conversion and they're wanting to see, like, okay, what if I did more? What if I did less? How much tax would I pay? And so the software, it's really cool, is that Tom, and we're going to do this in the later video, is you're just able, I just see people's eyes. So we'll set it right below IRMAA. And then the next place is set it at the maximum 24% federal tax rate and set it at the 32% tax rate and just bounce it around. And it works all the way back through the plan. And people like the flexibility of this, and they're really trying to understand Roth conversions. And I just see a lot of interest in this. I'll also tell you that when we put this plan together based on the software, all you're really signing up, what Tom and Susan are signing up for, is how much Roth conversion we're going to do in 2026, which probably isn't going to be as much because he has his salary, and then maybe 2027. And then after that, we're going to show an amount of Roth conversion, but look, it's going to be dependent on factors. And so we can refigure this stuff every year. So the whole idea of a plan is to make decisions about all 7 of these things, including IRA and Roth conversions, and then make those decisions every year out into the future and then look at how things work out. Same with taxes. Um, I just want to emphasize that Tom is just running through this quickly. And, even though you agree to all this by doing the plan, maybe you have us managing your money, helping you with these Roth conversions, you're not signing up to do something in 2028, 2029, 2030. Is we're going to get this software back out and refigure this stuff year by year. So go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all good points, and that brings up a very important thing to know with the plan, right? When we're doing a financial plan, essentially we're taking a snapshot in time and trying to plan from now until 95. Life is not going to happen the way we think it's going to happen, right? Things going to come up, life changes, life happens, right? I mean, nothing ever goes according to plan. And the plan is meant to be adjusted and updated and changed if need be. And so it's a very helpful process. Don't get me wrong, I think it's very valuable to go through this exercise. It gets you going the right direction, right? Make sure we're not missing any important things. But in reality, 2 years from now, one of you gets a cancer diagnosis, something happens to your kid and we need to spend some money on him, or I mean, who knows what could happen. The plan needs to be flexible enough to be adjusted, and that's something that we take into account, and that's why we when we're helping clients manage money, we're always going back and we use the plan as a starting point, and we're always referring back to that, but not to an extent that prevents us from changing it if need be, right? It needs to be updated, then great, then we make some adjustments there. And honestly, the process of doing the plan, this exercise of going through all the software, and again, it's a very collaborative approach. Like we're doing this together. It's not you just listening to me do all this stuff and moving all around. Is that is where a lot of the value is, right? The plan is helpful. The written plan is very helpful to refer back to. You can turn back to it, but it's how we get there, how we do that planning process. To me, is really where a lot of the value is that we provide. So let's finish up where I want to show you kind of here's the board like we went over. You can look through, here's sort of the actual written plan that we put together for them. But the last page we have, and I want to finish on this today, is just a summary page of all the recommendations that we make. And so this will preview a little bit what we're going to go through in the next 7 videos. But if we look at income planning, right, what we're recommending for them is for Tom to file for Social Security at his age 68. It's a little past his birthday, but really it's around Susan's full retirement age. And we'll get into the reasons for that later. But that's different from where he started, right? He wanted initially, he came in wanting to wait till 70. Through our conversations, they've decided to go ahead and file at 68, his age 68, her age 67, as opposed to waiting to 70. And then with that, they've mirrored that with a couple of different annuities that provide some additional income on top of Social Security. So a lot of their income is not subject to market fluctuations, not the ups and downs that come with the stock market. And so that's a piece, that's where the sort of the income piece is. On Medicare, he was in sort of a small practice. So he was already on Medicare, paying a lot of IRMAA based off of the increased cost of his income was being so high. What we're going to do for them is help review the Medicare insurance, but more importantly is help him file an appeal for Medicare when he retires so he can drop that cost back down. And again, that's tied in with the Roth conversions where we're not doing as much. So therefore we can stay below those income numbers. We'll get to that in that video. On long-term care, they're have agreed to apply for a long-term care policy with some of their IRA money that really removes their biggest risk of needing some type of care. They've seen their parents go through it. They know what that looks like. They don't want to put their kids through that. And so that's something that we're moving forward with them. From an investment standpoint, because we've done the annuities and we've taken some of the risk out of the income piece of it, they can be a little bit more aggressive with the remaining investments, really trying to grow that money as a legacy to something to leave to their kids. And especially if we're doing the Roth conversions, that would be tax-free money coming to the kids for that portion of it. So again, we've recommended they actually increase their equity allocation paired with the annuity piece of it to like an 80-20 portfolio with the rest of the money. And again, that we'll get into that in a future video. RMDs and sort of tax planning. I don't want to, we need to manage the RMDs when it happens. When you get to that age, you have to start taking money out. The Roth conversions help minimize some of that. The annuities help cover some of that as well. We'll get more into that. And then the tax planning is a big one. The Roth conversions, that's really what drew their interest in initially, but it's dialing in the level of Roth conversion. For their plan, we're limiting it. The target is to get right up to the point where they're not having to pay extra for Medicare. And I think in their situation, it works pretty well. So I know I went through all that very quickly, and you might say, I want more information on that. Watch the next 7 videos because those next 7 videos will dig into details on each section, give you more analysis, give you more understanding of how we arrived at these recommendations. But we kind of wanted to start with the end in mind, show you where we ended up, and then the next 7 videos will show you how we got there. So, Hans, I don't know if you have anything else to add here.
Yeah. I mean, the whole purpose of today was just to introduce you to Tom and Susan, who are 67 and 66 and right at retirement. But if you're 75 and your spouse is 74 and you really haven't done this formal planning, we have lots of people come into us in their 70s and they've already made a lot of these decisions, but we do one of these plans for them to just pick up where they are and see if we can better things for them. Conversely, if you're 58 and your wife's 57 and your spouse is 57 and you're 10 years away from retirement or more, that's an ideal time to do one of these plans because there's a lot of things we would have done differently for this couple had we met them 10 years ago. So the whole idea of the video is just to give you a bird's eye view of what a plan looks like. And what Tom said, wait for the next 7 videos. If you have more information on Social Security, long-term care. We're going to go into more detail on just that section. But the other thing you can do is just give us a call. We can start one of these plans for you now. I mean, and we can just kind of get going, and we're going to take in the information. This costs you $1,000. Now, I'm not giving this as an open offer. We don't take everybody on as clients, but that's when. So we're going to have a meeting, perhaps a couple meetings to make sure there's a fit. But once there's a fit, you pay us $1,000, and that's all you're buying from us. You're going to get one of these plans that looks pretty similar to what we've just. We'll have different information in there tailored to you, but we're also showing that is if we've, you kind of looked at this and you said, man, I want this. I want to hire Tom and Hans to do one of these things for me. You don't have to wait for the rest of these 7 videos. Just call us up and send us an email message, and we'll get the process started.
One other point I will make that I meant to mention, but I went through sort of the plan in the show notes. If you kept scrolling in the show notes, you'd actually see that we have a much longer appendix. I mean, that's like 100 pages long or something. So I didn't want to go through that today. But that has all the plan. We've taken graphics from various illustrations and different stuff. The full illustrations, the full appendix is behind that plan. So if you want to look at the actual details of everything, scroll through that. It might put you to sleep, but they are there if you're interested. But like Hans mentioned, if you have questions about your situation, give us a call. That's what we're here to help with. So we'd be happy to talk to you. The initial call, we don't charge anything on that initial call. Don't feel like calling us, we're going to charge you $1,000. Like Hans mentioned, the initial calls are just to make sure we're a good fit. Sometimes we can give you some good advice. There's really not a fit there, and we just sort of send you on your way. And other times you come in and it's like, yeah, I think we really can help you. And that's when we would start talking about doing a full plan for you.
Today's episode is going to be about Social Security, and then we're just going to march we're going to be through 8 sessions when we go through each topic and just kind of dive into Social Security. And so Tom's going to share with you, why are we doing this video on Social Security Day, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because when you are retiring, one of the first decisions you have to make is, do I start Social Security or do I wait? And that decision is going to live with you the rest of your retirement. So you need to be thoughtful about it. You need to make the right decision and think through it, right? A lot of people, they come in and say, I'm retiring, I start Social Security. And sometimes that is the right answer, and sometimes it's not. So we want to spend some time really digging into that. And when we're doing plans, that's often where we start with is, what are we doing with Social Security? Because ultimately, it's one of the biggest decisions you're going to make. And so let me bring up the show notes. You can find these below our link on our video. They're also at our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board, and we'll get into all the details on the board. We actually have the Social Security statements where we can see what the amounts are at various ages. We'll get to the examples in a second. So this is Tom's benefit. You can see at 68, it's 42.98, 69, 46.57, it's 70, which is, again, as a reminder, we went over this in our first video. His default position when he met us, he was planning on waiting until 70 to get this maximum check, 5,176. The next statement is Susan's benefit. Again, she was a stay-at-home mom most of her adult life. She worked early in her career, which is why she has some checks. But if she filed only on her record at her full retirement age of 66 and 10 months, it's $874 a month. And then you can see it there. Again, we'll get into the spousal benefits as we go through the video. And then we have the plan like we did in the previous video. And all 8 of these are all, we have 8 videos in total. The 7 content ones will have the plan along with the appendix in every single one. So you can reference back that and see how they all interact with each other there. So that's also here. So let me turn it back to Hans. We'll go through some of the examples, and then a little bit later, we'll get into Right Capital, which is where we started last plan. That's where we do a lot of our projections for our financial plans.
Okay, so just remember, we met Tom and Susan when Tom was turning 65 3 years ago. He was buying Medicare insurance from us. He watched all the videos and kind of knew what he wanted. We talked to him about financial planning. I'm not retired yet. We'll get to that. And here it is 3 years later, he's retiring. And now, he says, let's do a financial plan. And where he was all along is he's like, I'm waiting till I'm 70 and I want to get that largest Social Security check, $51.76 a month is the projection. I'll just wait till I'm 70 and I don't need the money. I can wait. I want to get it as big as it possibly can. Okay. Now comes Susan into the picture. And when we showed her her Social Security check at full retirement at 66 and 10 months is $874. And she, of course, didn't really have to say it, but she felt kind of little. So her contribution is going to be $874 a month. His is going to be $51.76 a month, and we got to wait a little while for that. And this really doesn't have to do with the dollars and cents. It's just kind of like, really? Yeah, that's all I get for a Social Security check. And we said, aha, but you're eligible for the spousal benefit, and you can get half of what Thomas gets. So she just kind of left with that. This is a conversation back 3 years ago. So she's thinking, I don't want that small Social Security check. I want the $2,000 a month Social Security. Or it's really like 1997. But 2,000 a month sounds a lot better than 874, and it did, at least did to her, and it just kind of put the conversation on ice. So now we're doing the plan. We get the Social Security statements out. We look at them and we say, okay, so Tom, you're going to get nothing for 2 years because you're not 70 yet. You're just turning 68. And Susan, you're going to get $874 a month. And she's like, I want that half of his. And it looks like to me that's $2,600 a month. I want that now. Well, first of all, it's not $2,600. That's not correct because it's half of some different number. And the second thing is you can't get the half of his until he files. And he's not going to do that for 2 years. So she wasn't too happy with that. So then we went back and ran the numbers and we said, okay, if Tom will take his Social Security now, it's almost $4,300 a month. So it's $900 a month less, almost $900 a month less. That's for life. I mean, so that's a big deal. But you're also going to get $4,300 a month checks for 2 years that you wouldn't have gotten. So he's going to get almost 100 grand, or a little more than 100 grand that he wouldn't have gotten. So when he reaches 70, he's going to have a smaller check, but he's going to have 100 grand in the bank or something thereabouts. I'm simplifying this conversation, but most important, and the real reason to do it, is it's going to keep your wife happy because you have to file for her to get the 50%. And the 50%, or the almost $2,000 a month, is based on what Tom's check it had been if he'd have filed at full retirement. So to her, this is a measure of what she's contributing to the household from Social Security. It's just, let's cut through the baloney here. And so it's $2,000 a month for her, $4,300 a month for him. They're going to get the checks right away. And that's kind of, so what we had to do as financial planners is we had to make sure this makes sense. And it may not have been what we recommended, but it is what we're going to recommend as long as it makes a little bit of sense and it keeps her happy, him happy, and it actually improves their cash flow for a couple of years. So I want to push it to Tom, and I want Tom to kind of react to all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it illustrates that the financial plan is not all about the dollar signs, the money in the cents, right? I mean, I could sit here and make an argument. Yeah, it makes sense to wait till 70. Here's all the reasons to do it. But we want to listen to you, right? If you have an opinion or you have thoughts, right, that takes some weight in our discussions, right? And so in this situation, we listened to her. It was very clear she really wanted that higher check. And so what we set out to do is say, okay, well, let's run it in both models. Let's see what it looks like by taking it sooner. And really what I'm looking to see is, does this taking it sooner cause you guys to, are you shooting yourself in the foot too much, right? Like if they were at 62, they would have gotten a lot more pushback from us. Like that's too soon to take it. You shouldn't do it. And we would have run through the numbers and showed them that. But we're looking at taking him at 68 versus 70. Yes, they'd get a higher check. They have other money, right? It's not like this is their only decision they need to make. And so we want to just stress test the plan and see, okay, what does it look like here? And if we're going to be okay in either scenario, then we want to take we want your opinion on where you're at. And so that's sort of how we approach that conversation. But I do want to show you how it works within the software, right? I mean, we're always going back to the right capital. And again, The right capital is going to tell us the quote unquote optimal strategy is one thing, but we want to look to see, okay, if we take it sooner, what does that look like? So let me show you how we do that within the software here. And so again, this is the home screen. We went over this on the last video. I'm not going to go into nearly as much depth on every screen, but we are going to dig into a couple pieces here. But just as a reminder, on the income, we've plugged in the benefits they would get at 68 for him, for Tom, which is 42.98, and then for Susan, it's $874. And again, the software does all the calculations for the spousal benefits. So when we go to the retirement tab, and one of the things, if you don't have a right capital software or account, this doesn't really much matter. But just know if you're in here, you can sort of click down on the different menus. So we have the tabs, then we have more tabs, then within that you can click further down. So there's always, I shouldn't say always, but there's a lot more details as you click through the software here. But we're going to click on the retirement tab for a second, and you'll notice the current plan and proposed plan right now is modeled as Tom filing at 68, Susan filing at her full retirement age. But I can tell it, say, I want you to solve for quote unquote the optimal strategy. And you'll see the optimal strategy is him waiting till 70 and Susan filing at 66 or 67 or 66 and 8 months, her full retirement age. The thing to take, one thing to take into consideration is just remember that in the software, we have both of them living to age 95. That's a big assumption. Will they both live to 95? I mean, I don't know. I mean, we obviously can't predict that. If we knew for certain both would live to 95, then maybe it makes sense to wait till 70. But the question becomes is where is that crossover point? Where is the point where you would get more from Social Security, total amount from Social Security versus a lower amount? And you can actually see that on the Social Security page. So retirement, Social Security. What I'm going to do is compare the optimal strategy to the current strategy. Just as a reminder, optimal strategy is Tom waiting until 70, Susan filing at her full retirement age. Current strategy is Susan filing at her full retirement age right at the same time Tom is filing for his, so she gets the spousal benefit. So when we look at, I like looking at this because it gives us, it's sort of the scale is hard to kind of see, but what you're seeing is the current strategy is they get a higher check now because they're getting money in currently, right? As we're getting those checks in, between 68 and 70 for Tom, he's not getting that big check, and then she's also getting less. So if we just went to by age 70, right, you can see the numbers by age 70. Oh, let me go back here. On the current strategy, they would have received $184,000 from Social Security and only like 56,000 from it would be her check for those 2 years essentially. But one of the question is, where is that crossover point? Where is the point where you would have gotten more from by waiting till 70? And it's at Tom's age 84, right? So at the end of the day, this helped him get a little bit more comfortable with going ahead and filing because he was still kind of wanting to take it at 70. Susan really wanted to take it sooner. When I showed him this, he sort of eased his stance a little bit. It's like, okay, well, my crossover point is 84. I might not even make it to 84. So it softened him a little bit, more willing to consider starting sooner. So that's one thing we looked at. The next thing we looked at is what does this do from a cash flow perspective, right? So we're looking at cash flows, and we can see under the income. So he's got his partial year salary, and as soon as he retires, the Social Security checks start, right? So they immediately start getting some money coming in. It's only a partial year in 2026 because we're waiting until he retires to file for these benefits. But we looked at 2027. I mean, they're getting, and the software does assume some cost of living adjustments, but they're getting over $76,000 from Social Security alone. That is a great starting baseline income number for them to plan the rest of their life around. So again, it's a nice benefit. It gets some cash coming in right now as soon as they retire. So he liked that. Then a question came up: well, how much taxes do we have to pay on this? Because he kind of knew, taxes on Social Security are important. We won't get into too much detail on this, but essentially how they tax Social Security is it's based upon your other income. So as you have other income, more of your Social Security becomes taxable. Up to 85% of your check can be considered taxable income. Another way to put that, everyone gets at least 15% of their check tax free, and then up to 85% could be taxable income. That's not 85% tax, it's just taxable income that gets put onto your tax return, and then you look at the tax brackets you're in. And we can actually model that here. We can see what that looks like. Now, again, all these are projections. This does have the Roth conversion component built in. So again, as a reminder from our previous video, and we'll have another video where we get into Roth conversions later, is we are converting up to the point where they are not paying any IRMAA. So no additional cost for Medicare. That's the limit that we're targeting for Roth conversions. But under this tax estimate and details, we actually have model tax returns projected into the future. So I'm going to go to 2027 to show a full year. So, we have some interest coming in, some dividends coming in, so the IRA distributions. This is where the annuity and the Roth conversions are coming into play there. Or excuse me, the annuities is here. This is the 33,000 is the Roth conversions is what we're modeling here. But you'll notice Social Security. So we have $76,000 coming in from Social Security. The software is doing all the calculations of how much of that is taxable, and you'll notice 85% of their check is taxable income. So when you're doing the projections and stuff, when we're looking at tax brackets, you need to account for 85% of this number is taxable income, and then it does all the calculations for the Roth conversions to determine where the number is, avoiding IRMAA, avoiding all those things. So the software is doing all of that calculations. But at the end of the day, the Social Security is an important decision. He came in wanting to wait, which is a lot of time what we're recommending. But it was really Susan who was driving her wanting to get some. As we ran through the process, showed him what the different amounts were, he kind of realized, okay, this isn't going to hurt me in the long run too much by taking it now versus waiting till 70, and it makes her happy. That was all he needed to really hear. He said, okay, we'll go ahead and file as soon as they retire, which happens to be right at when Susan is at her full retirement age. So that worked out pretty nicely. But they get that full check, or her full spousal benefit that she's eligible for as soon as she becomes eligible for it. He gets the over $4,000 a month coming in, and they sort of lived happily ever after. So that's how we approach the Social Security decision. Again, not every situation is the same. Not every recommendation is the same. And we take into account your opinion. I mean, I could go through another example, not with Tom and Susan, but I've had plenty of clients that come in, have plenty of money they could live off. It makes all the sense in the world to delay it. They say, I've waited this long. I don't care what the numbers say. I want my check. We say, okay, we build the plan out or one thing. So the planning process is collaborative, really trying to get you guys into the best position possible, and with the full information that you can have, right? At least you're making the decision with full clarity. You know what the decision you're making and what impact it has on everything else, and you can be happy with that decision you make.
Okay. So what we want to talk about here is, first of all, the survivor. So, I mean, not all couples, both of them live till 95. In fact, few of them do. So somebody is going to pass away and we're going to leave a survivor. And I want to simplify what happens is when either Susan or Tom passes away, when the first one of them passes away, the survivor is going to get Tom's check. And had he waited till 70 and then filed, and then he died at like 78, then Susan is going to live on. If she's living on, she's going to live on with his larger check. So the estate planning issue here would say, maybe wait till 70, because we want to preserve that large check, because the smaller one's going to stop. And what became the priority was Susan's check. And I agree with Tom, and I agree with the other Tom that's in the plan. Happy wife, happy life. So her getting a $2,000 a month check as opposed to an $874 check became the driving factor. That's what we did. Her check of $2,000 a month and then adjusted for inflation is going to stop when the first one of them dies, even if it's Tom. So the larger check lives on. That's the estate planning issue with Social Security. It's just that simple. As you want disproportionate checks, you want that larger check, the largest check, to be as large as it can be, because it'll live on for the survivor when they have to live with only one check. Okay, Tom, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's feelings on this are different, right? Some people like getting that higher check, and we often recommend getting the higher check. But other people kind of want the money now. And the biggest thing is when we're doing planning is if we're going to make a decision that is maybe not the optimal decision, We just need to make sure that we're not causing you to have problems later in life on other areas, right? So, I mean, for example, if they didn't have as much money saved up, this might have been a harder decision to stomach, right? Is because if he were to predecease her early on and she gets a lower check, if they didn't have other income, that could be a problem to replace. And so there's a lot of factors that go into this. But we want to look at all factors, see how it impacts everything, make sure that when we're making a decision, we know what the flow through sort of the other areas it impacts as part of the plan. And that's where the whole plan is helpful. It's like when we're writing the recommendations, we're considering everything, right? We're seeing how it impacts all these different 7 areas as opposed to just the one area. Including because the other risk I see people come in is they're only looking at their check and they're not considering the spousal benefit to the estate planning problem that Hans mentioned. And oftentimes it's the husbands coming in. They say, "Well, my dad died at 80. I'm not going to make it to 85. Like, I just want my money now." It's like, okay, like that makes sense, except for the fact you're ignoring that your wife might live on to 100, and are we causing her to have problems later on? They've never thought about that. So I just want you, when you're making a decision, I just want you to consider all aspects, and that way you can make the decision with full clarity. You know what decision you're making. You know what the opportunity cost, what options you're giving up, and as long as you have done that exercise and you're comfortable with the decision, then great, let's move forward. But too often I see people make decisions not having thought through any of this stuff. And sometimes it's too late. We can't undo it. And it could be, you know, costly down the road.
Sure. So we talked about the estate planning. We're going to talk about income. I mean, these people have several $1,000,000 of net worth. They're retiring on a high income. Just understand right out of the box, about half their money is coming from Social Security. It's almost half. Um, that's significant in the income plan. And then talking about taxes, if these people stay below the first IRMAA threshold in their Roth conversions, which it looks like they're going to in the plan, their overall income tax that they're going to be paying on Social Security isn't really going to be that high. I mean, what I'm telling you is they're keeping their income at 200,000 and below, which they can easily do with that large of a Social Security check. Their income tax situation overall is going to be a relatively low amount on that Social Security. We're showing today what we advise them around Medicare and IRMAA. So it's Medicare IRMAA Financial Plan Series. So Tom, why are we doing this video today?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because Medicare is confusing, right? I mean, they send you this big book. It's called the Medicare and You book. If you pick that up and read through it, you are going to walk away not understanding how this program works at all. I mean, it's hard to understand. It's not logical, and it's important, right? Most CFPs that are in the business don't understand Medicare at the level that we do. Really getting into the weeds there, and it's important because if you make mistakes here, those mistakes might live with you the rest of your life. And there's penalties involved. I mean, there's just a lot of mess. And so it needs to be part of that larger plan, like we do here at Cardinal. So let me bring up the show notes. You can find these at the link below our video. They're also on our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board where we'll walk through all this here in a second. And we do actually have, and one of the things we'll get to in the video is this IRMAA, this income related monthly adjustment amount. We'll define what that is a little bit later. But this is the letter that you're going to get, that you potentially get if your income exceeds certain limits, that charges you more. Sometimes the people are first learning about IRMAA when they get this letter. And so this is what it looks like. We'll talk about that. And then we have the plan that again, all 8 videos, this will be in the show notes where we show what the plan is. We have a section specifically around Medicare and IRMAA. You'll see that here. Again, we'll get to the specifics in a second. But again, when we're looking at doing a financial plan, all of these areas interact with each other, and you need to have a plan that is coordinated where these are working together and not just isolated at one specific item here. So let me turn it back to Hans, and then we'll dive into the board here.
Okay, so the topic of the show today is Medicare. And if this is your first time watching us here at Cardinal, we're very careful to teach a lesson and to go through Medicare. And so that's the primary subject is that people turning 65, you're on Medicare and now you've got to research insurance. you got to go through a whole bunch of, this video is going to stand by itself, even if you're not necessarily going to watch the other 7 videos. This is video 3 of 8, and it is covering Medicare. But I also want to tell you that because of IRMAA, the Medicare tax, this is also going to get a little bit into the IRA 401k section, the income section, and then, of course, taxes. So back to Medicare. The first subject that we need to go over with Tom and Susan is Tom is turning 68, Susan is turning 67, and Tom is retiring. And they came to us 3 years ago when Tom was turning 65, still practicing. He's an MD, and he's practicing and covered by group insurance, but it was a small group insurance plan. And so he was paying a lot of money for both himself and Susan, plus his employees. And but his part of the premium was a lot, like $1,500 a month each. And so he wasn't that worried about IRMAA, because IRMAA, even though it's bad, is less than the premium on the group insurance. And what he learned coming to us 3 years ago is he couldn't even keep that group insurance if he wanted to, because it's not creditable coverage under Medicare. So in other words, Medicare requires you, when you're turning 65, to sign up for Medicare Part B at that time, unless you have group insurance from you or your spouse. If you have group insurance that's creditable, Medicare will allow you to delay Medicare. So if he had worked for a big hospital or something, he could have, both of them could have just stayed on the group insurance till now when he's retiring. And then what's interesting is he would get this open enrollment, both of them would, so that it would essentially be delayed. But they weren't able to do that because 3 years ago, when he went on Medicare, and 2 years ago when she went on Medicare, they were needing to enroll in Medicare at that time and leave the group insurance. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first common mistake I see people make. And it's one of the very first decision you need to make is, do I need to enroll in Medicare or not? And I see mistakes on both ways, right? I mean, you're going to get a lot of mail and a lot of people reaching out right when you turn 65. I mean, that's just common for everybody who's turning 65. And in that mail, a lot of things will reference you need to sign up. And if you don't, you will be penalized. And so I have some people come in, they're still working, they work for a huge company, and they say, I have to sign up now. I don't want these penalties. What do I need to do? And we got to look at the situation, look at the cost, look how much they're paying, right? If you're for a big employer, oftentimes the employer is covering a lot of that cost, and it can make sense not to enroll in Medicare. So there, I see mistakes that direction. With this couple, Tom and Susan, they had heard about delaying Medicare Part B. We have group coverage, but they still wanted just to ask, right? They just wanted to make sure they didn't make any mistakes, and it's a good thing they did because they are under the scenario where they had to sign up for Medicare. Say, well, wait a minute. If they're still working and they have group coverage, why do they need to sign up? And it gets down to this idea of credible coverage. And so, if what Medicare defines as credible coverage is you need to have at least have group coverage from an employer, an active employer, not retiree coverage. So you still need to be working, and that employer needs to have more than 20 employees. If you don't meet those criteria, you have to sign up for Medicare, or you will be faced with penalties later on. So again, it's nuanced, right? Is, do I work? Am I not? How big is my employer? Do I need to sign up? And then we need to look at the cost, right? That's an important piece too, because sometimes, especially with the spouse, keeping them on the group coverage is pretty expensive. Now, the employee, typically it's not too bad, but the spouse can be pretty expensive there. And sometimes it can make sense for the employee to stay on the group coverage and the spouse to sign up for Medicare. So every situation is different. It's very client specific of what our recommendation is. But our first step in looking is, do you even need to sign up? And in this case, for Tom and Susan, they did back when they first met us, when they were first turning 65, because they did not have credible coverage.
So this is fairly common, this situation, because what we're doing is we're going over the financial plan that we've just written for Tom and Susan. We've just completed, but the Medicare section is historical because we did it 3 years ago. and then 2 years ago for Susan. So this is just an important point for you to get out of the video is you need to get your sign up date around Medicare correct. So next point, people coming onto Medicare, a lot of them don't even know this, but you're going to have a very important decision to make is, are you going to stay on original Medicare and buy a supplement? So that's one situation. Or are you going to take your original Medicare and turn it into a Medicare Advantage plan, or essentially outsource it? And so this is an either or deal. And in Tom and Susan's case, they elected to stay on original Medicare and buy a supplement. Part of that reason for doing that at the time is they can afford the premium for the supplement and the extra money. And it gives them choices in their home health, in their health care that they wouldn't have over here with Medicare Advantage. Now, I want to point out the reasons for that is original Medicare plus a supplement comes with no networks. So you don't have to look up a doctor in a directory, or you get referred to a specialist and make sure that they're in there. And then the second thing is there's no managed care. So you don't have to get the insurance company's permission to do surgery or do tests or whatever a plan of treatment. With original Medicare, the doctors don't have to call original Medicare or call Medicare and get permission to do things. And then the supplement just sits in the background and pays the deductibles and copayments. So what I just want people watching this to understand, and I think it'd be good for each of you, if you're already on Medicare, for you to figure out which one of these two are you on, because some people have a hard time answering that. So original Medicare and a supplement is where they were, and their reason for doing that is they didn't want networks. And Tom, being a doctor himself, he understood all this stuff. And then as well, they don't want any managed care. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is sort of that next decision. Once you've decided that, yes, I am enrolling Medicare and you're signing up, now we have to make a decision. Do you go with original Medicare and a Medicare supplement or a Medicare Advantage route? And we have other videos where we go like sort of real deep in explaining the differences there. That's not necessarily what today's video is on, but it is an important decision you need to make. And Hans is exactly right. We have 6,000 clients across the country in all 50 states. And if I picked up and randomly called one, I got about a 50-50 shot if they even remember if they're on a Medicare Advantage or Medicare supplement. And we help them with it, right? But people just sort of forget about it. They start mixing up sort of rules on one and then applying it to their situation when it doesn't, or vice versa. And so really need to understand what you have, how it works. And like Hans mentioned, the reason that Tom and Susan went with the original Medicare route is they didn't want to deal with networks. They have family that lives across the country. They're often traveling and seeing them. They wanted to be able to see doctors in those places without worrying about networks. And then the managed care is nice, right? You don't need to get prior approval. You can go see the doctor that you want to see, go see a specialist. That's very attractive to them. It is from a monthly standpoint more expensive typically than the Medicare Advantage plan. So the cost can be a little bit higher. But the question is, what are you getting for that cost? I mean, personally, I can tell you I'm obviously not Medicare age yet, and who knows what the system will look like when I get there. But if it still works the same way, I personally would absolutely sign up for the Medicare supplement. If you've watched any of our videos, you know I have an autoimmune disease. I get monthly infusions that cost like $10,000 a month or something like that. And so certainly going the route where I have better coverage, a little bit higher premium, would be a no-brainer in my situation. But again, it's different from person to person, and that's why when we're doing a plan, we need to look at your specific situation and see what makes the most sense for you.
Okay. Now, their Medicare supplement, so which goes with original Medicare, they elected the Plan G 3 years ago and 2 years ago, and they still have it. And Tom's paying about $160 a month, and Susan is paying about $140 a month for the Plan G. And what I want you to understand is that the Plan G is the same. They're standardized from every single company. So it really doesn't matter which company they have, because they all offer the exact same benefits. And why did they choose Plan G? Because it has the highest level of benefits of all the Medicare supplements. And just to simplify, like we have other videos that are going to break this down, but when you think about it, with people that have substantial resources like they do. And you're going to find out later, they're each paying over $700 a month in IRMAA. That's $1,400 a month, $700 each. Plus, everybody in America for their Plan B, regardless, they're paying $202.90 a month for the Medicare Part B, like boy. So that's in addition to the $700. Um, when you're paying out all that money for your Medicare, why are you going to gum it up and cheap out on the supplement? That's one point that I'll make. Although some people, they want to carve some corners. They go with a high deductible Plan G, or they go with a Plan N to shave a little bit off of that. Generally, in our recommend, we ask people, but when they're paying out all this money for health care and they're getting really good insurance when you put the supplement with it, without networks, without prior authorization, why gum it all up by cheaping out on the supplement? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the supplement, the G plan, like Hans mentioned, is the most comprehensive plan that's available for people newly coming onto Medicare. If you're older, there could still be an F plan available, but again, we're not going to get into that today. But one of the things that I just want you to think through is, or remember, is that these supplements are standardized. So a G plan is a G plan is a G plan. It's the same coverage from every company, and it pays to shop these around every couple of years, 2 to 3 years. And if you read through the plan that we have in the appendix, you'll notice that we recommended that they actually look at switching their supplement. This is another common area that I think people miss is they think once I sign up for this company, I'm with this company for the rest of my time on Medicare. And that might be true, right? There's situations where you are kind of stuck with them. But if you are healthy and can qualify, it pays to shop these around every couple of years, right? To keep that price as low as possible, because these supplement prices, they do increase as you get older. The companies raise rates. The rates are different from state to state. We have other videos on that. But again, about every 2 to 3 years, it makes sense to look at switching. And so if you are on Medicare and you're watching this and you've had the same plan for several years, call us up. We might be able to help save you some money on that, keeping the coverage identical, right? So you're not losing any benefits, you're just paying less for it. So something to remember. And then for people newly coming onto Medicare, don't feel like you're going to be stuck with this company forever. Now, where that could happen is in the future, you do have to answer health questions to switch. So when you first sign up for Medicare, you can pick any company you want, no health questions at all. 3 years down the road, if you're looking to switch the supplement, there is underwriting. It's not as extensive as like long-term care or life insurance and those type of things, but they are allowed to say no, right? If you have health concerns, typically serious stuff, cancer, strokes, heart attacks, that's not all inclusive, but that gives you an idea of sort of the range of severity we're talking about here. If you have things like that, you might not be able to switch. And so that's something to keep in mind. But as long as you're healthy, it pays to shop these around about every 2 to 3 years.
Just want to add on, open enrollment is a thing when you're turning 65, or if you have delayed enrollment. What open enrollment, it's the same in all 50 states and DC, that you have a right to buy any supplement for sale in your state, any Medicare supplement for sale, any plan letter, without answering any health questions for a period of 6 months. So just understand that if you're in poor health and you've got concerns about this, now this decision that you make at turning 65, you may have to live with that for the rest of your life. So again, a good reason to maybe come to some financial planners where we're going to take a high view of this whole thing as opposed to somebody just signing up Medicare supplements. So next topic is the Part D drug plan. And I just wanted to emphasize that Tom and Susan are on different Part D drug plans. And the reason for that, and that's sometimes difficult to explain to people, they want the same thing. They've both had the same health insurance their whole marriage and their whole life. And the reason they're on different ones is they're taking different drugs. They're in a different situation. One has a lot of generics, the other one's got some specialty drugs. And so we're going to plug all this in a computer system, and we're going to plug your drugs in there, and then what pharmacy you prefer to go to, and work backwards and find the best drug plan for you. And we did that for them. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, the drug plans are different than the supplements, right? It's a separate plan. It's typically not with the same company that you have your supplement with. And like Hans mentioned, it's not necessarily the same company your spouse is with, too. The difference between these and the supplements is these are not standardized, right? These plans are very different from plan to plan, very specific on what medications you're taking, will determine which plan is the best for you. And these ones you can shop around in the fall of every year between October 15th and December 7th. It's the annual enrollment window. And so these ones, especially if the plans are changing, you get changing medications, you probably at least want to look at this annually just to make sure you're still on the best plan. Medicare site, yeah, we've done videos where you can actually go online and do it yourself. If you have questions, we can walk you through how to do that. But these ones, certainly you probably want to look at more often than the supplement. And there's no health questions to switch the drug plan, so you can literally just pick whichever plan is the best for you, regardless of what medications, what diagnoses you have. And so it does, again, these ones you want to review, um, if not every year, probably every year, as you're doing through that.
Okay, so the rest of the presentation here is going to be about IRMAA. And what is IRMAA? IRMAA stands for Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. Isn't that something? That's an acronym, and it's by Medicare. And what it really is the Medicare tax. Is you're going to pay extra. And with Tom and Susan, uh, we're going to just show it real simple. Is it used right now in 2026? They're paying IRMAA based upon their 2024 tax return. And that tax return, their MAGI, or modified adjusted gross income, was between $410,000 and $750,000. Yeah, he's an MD, had a high income. It also included their other investments and just whatever goes in AGI or MAGI. That's the amount. So they got $446 plus $83, which is like $520. And what I didn't mention earlier is the base Medicare Part B premium is 202.90 per month. So everybody that has Medicare pays for Part B, no matter where they live in the country, 202.90 a month. And these IRMAA amounts in this chart, this is the married filing joint tax return 2024. You add up all these numbers and they add up to over $700 a month. That each of them, Tom, $700, 720 or something, Susan, 720, just for their Medicare Part B and Part D. And then there's a separate charge to the insurance company for the Part D, plus they got to pay for the supplement. And again, sometimes people choke when they go through all of this, but when we go through it, but in their case, they're comparing it to a $1,500 a month group insurance premium that he was paying through his practice each. So it was a savings. But with most people that are of a high income and a high income 2 years ago, they choke when they go through all of this. And then they want to know something. So the answer is, can you appeal IRMAA, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can appeal it if you meet certain criteria. And so we help a lot of clients with this process. And we a lot of times, if they've met us before going on to Medicare, we can plan life events around certain timeframes to allow us to appeal it. But if I just boil it down, what allows you to appeal this IRMAA is, one, you need to have a life-changing event. And they're defined on this form SSA 44. We have other shows where we really get into the weeds in that form, but the life-changing event, the most common one we use is work stoppage or work reduction, right? So you're retiring or you're cutting back on work. Those are the most common ones we use. And you need to have your income be less. That is an important piece that I see people miss. I'll get to an example in a second on that. But if you have those two things, a life-changing event and a lower income, absolutely you can appeal this IRMAA. We have a very high probability of success when we're helping file appeals. That our success rate is very high with clients that we're doing this with, because we know how the form works, we know how to file it, we know what to put on, what not to put on. Again, not lying in any ways, but just how to fill the form out correctly to get this appeal approved. And you could potentially get rid of all of IRMAA, or even if you're not getting rid of all of it, drop it down a couple thresholds. And so One of the things that is often asked, that we get this question all the time, is okay, I've watched your other videos. We're doing this planning. On a future video in this series, we'll get into Roth conversions because we're talking about that a lot of times and doing a lot of planning around that. Is do Roth conversions impact this IRMAA cost? And the answer is yes. Is as you increase your income, which Roth conversions do that, you bring back in the possibility of paying more IRMAA. And so one of the things that people miss when, a lot of Medicare agents out there, all they do is Medicare, they don't understand how these decisions impact other things. Or on the other side of things, financial advisors who are doing Roth conversions, doing tax planning, doing all this stuff, not thinking about the Medicare implications, oftentimes can lead to pretty upset clients, right? At the end of the day, you don't want to pay a cost that you don't know is coming. And I see it all the time. People don't know this is coming until they get that letter, and at that point, it's too late to do anything about it. So the other tricky thing is, and Hans sort of alluded to this or mentioned this, is IRMAA is based upon your income from 2 years ago. So if you're watching this video in 2026, your IRMAA in 2026 is based upon your income in 2024. We get to 2027, it's based off your income in 2025. So it's always on a 2-year rolling basis. They're reevaluating it every year based off your income from 2 years ago, and they're constantly doing that. So when we think about Roth conversions and tax planning, and again, we'll have a separate video on that. Yes, it increases your income. Yes, it could bring in IRMAA for that next year. But then after that, maybe we could reduce IRMAA, right? Especially if you have a really large IRA balance and RMDs alone are going to cause you to pay IRMAA. Sometimes it pays to go ahead and accept some level of IRMAA now to avoid higher levels in the future. So we don't want this IRMAA cost to drive every decision we're making from a planning perspective, but it's a factor. We need to consider it. We need to see how it plays out as part of the larger plan. The biggest goal that I have, if you're watching this video, is I want you at least to know about it. Because I can't tell you the number of times people have never heard about this. They did things 2 years ago, and we can't do anything about it, right? They just have to pay it. So just know it's coming. When you start making decisions, know that it could impact your Medicare price for 2 years ago. And one more word of caution, and then I'll turn it back to Hans here, is if you file this appeal, is your income that you put down on that appeal form needs to be pretty close, right? So there are a lot of times where we've done a plan for people, we help them file the appeal, they went on, we're not managing their money because they wanted to do that themselves, and then they decide, you know what, I think I want to do more Roth conversion than what we initially laid out, just for whatever reason. So they go ahead and do that. They're not really thinking about it. They do that later in the year, and then we wait. 2 years go by, and then get a nice letter that says, hey, by the way, you filed an appeal 2 years ago telling us your income was going to be this. In actuality, it was higher. We want that money back. You should have been paying us that higher amount. We're going to undo the appeal. So if you file the appeal, and it's going to get approved if you fill it out properly, you need to have your income actually match that appeal form, or they're going to come back and claw that money back. So uh, lots of examples where I've seen people go out and do things on their own, not thinking about it, and they really shoot themselves in the foot. And by the way, that will also potentially impact their IRMAA 2 years in the future, right? So if you do that in 2026, you might have to pay back the appeal money and pay IRMAA in 2028. So again, there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of things to consider. That's why we want to include it as part of a larger plan. So everything is coordinating together to make sure that you're in the best spot possible.
Yeah, Tom, would you bring up the show notes and bring up Tom's IRMAA letter that he received in November? So here it is, and I just want to refer to it because you can go into the show notes and look this thing up, and you can just see what I'm about to show you. These are the 2026 IRMAA brackets. So, and they're using in 2026 2024's tax return. So you can just go look up what your 2024 tax return was, and then that drives 2026 IRMAA. And another way to look a little bit forward, look up your 2025 tax return, which you just filed a few months ago, and whatever is amount is of adjusted gross income and then modified adjusted gross income, that's going to drive 2027 IRMAA. And this is the chart. So you're either married filing jointly, and it's too late to do anything about how you filed in 2024 or 2025 because that's in the past, but that's what's driving this chart. And it just shows you that the threshold for a married couple filing jointly is 218,000 of income. So if you were under that, you're not facing IRMAA. If you're over 218,000, the first IRMAA bracket applies, and they're just like the tax brackets. The more you made 2 years ago, the more you're going to pay for your Medicare, and it's graduated, and it's also a cliff. If you go $1 into the new zone, you pay the whole amount of IRMAA for that. And then the single numbers are exactly half of that. So the threshold for a person filing single, 109,000. So we see a lot of singles come into this, and many of them are irritated about this. And we just want to tell you what it is, and then we're going to do our planning to an extent around IRMAA when you tell us to, when we were designing a financial plan. And we did this with Tom and Susan. And where I want to put a word of caution, I had clients come in here, they're in their early 70s. They bought Medicare from us, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And they really have just been watching the videos, and now they're coming in and they want the financial plan and they're buying that. And what I find out is she's done a wonderful job of keeping their income below 218,000, and she's very happy about that. He, on the other hand, is turning 73, and he's facing his first RMD. And all of a sudden, the more word of caution is, don't get so involved in IRMAA, and then you start avoiding IRMAA at all costs. You throw out other financial planning that would have been far more beneficial than some savings on IRMAA. So we're not doing that to Tom and Susan. And when you look into the financial plan, and you can go in the show notes, you'll find it, and you can stay tuned when we go over the Roth conversions, because we're recommending some Roth conversions for Tom and Susan in the future. And we're going to stay right under the IRMAA threshold, and we have a way to do that. And we're also show them doing more and paying some IRMAA, and we're going to do some planning around that. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point is it's a factor that we want to consider. No one likes paying this, right? I've never met the person that said, "Oh, I love paying this extra cost for Medicare." To some level, it feels unfair to those people. Whether it's fair or not, that's not our decision to make. But at the end of the day, no one really likes paying it. But sometimes it makes sense to go ahead and accept some level of it, right? At least we're doing it with our eyes wide open. We know what we're signing up for, and at least it's not a surprise. One of the tricky things about planning, especially Roth conversions and things like that around these IRMAA brackets, is we're making decisions this year, 2026, that's going to impact our Medicare price 2 years from now in 2028. Well, guess what we don't know is what the 2028 IRMAA brackets are, right? They're not going to release those till like the end of 2027. So we're having to sort of somewhat guess at them. They'll typically they do go up every year, so we do know they're going to be higher than the brackets we're looking at now. So typically we err on the side of caution. We look at the brackets that we know, we do our planning around that. That does build in some natural buffer up there, because you don't want to go right up to the penny, because if you've forgotten about that interest that's generated from the bank, even though it was only $5, if we went right up to the limit and you got another $5 of interest, you just stepped over the line, and now you pay the whole next bracket of IRMAA. Because like Hans mentioned, it's a cliff. You go $1 above that limit, you're paying the full thing. So in that bracket at least. And so again, when we're doing planning, we want to be mindful of it. We want to be aware of it. We don't want it to drive all of our decisions, although it is a factor that we're considering. In some situations, like for Tom and Susan, we're able to keep them below the IRMAA levels. Like it made sense to that. And in that other example Hans was mentioning with our current clients, they should have been doing more because their RMDs are about to start in, and those RMDs alone are going to push them into higher IRMAA brackets. And so that's one of the things that we're always weighing, is looking at sort of projected growth in those accounts. What does that do to their RMDs? Do we need to do more Roth conversions now to lessen the impact of those RMDs when they happen? I mean, there's a lot of factors that are considered here, and that's why we want to consider it as part of that larger plan, as opposed to just focusing on this one issue of IRMAA and making all our decisions around that.
Okay, as far as Medicare for Tom and Susan, they've ended up with original Medicare, and they bought a Plan G supplement, and they went original Medicare versus a Medicare Advantage because they don't want networks. They don't want part of managed care. They bought the Plan G because it has the most benefits. So once you're paying all this money, you might as well get the great insurance that comes with that. they bought during open enrollment. It meant they had to answer no health questions. They're both paying a lot of IRMAA, and there was no way around that while he was working and making the money, $700 a month plus. And we've shown you how you can apply the IRMAA brackets to your own situation and understand that a little bit better. What we're going to do with them is once he retires, we're going to do an appeal, and the appeal is based upon the retirement. We're going to use SSA Form 44. He's going to actually have to complete it, but we're going to help him with it. And the basis for that is the fact that he had work stoppage. He's not working after October, and so we're going to be able to appeal and use a future-looking income or the income in 2027 to determine our IRMAA level instead of going back and using 2025 income. So that's it, and that's the Medicare portion of it. And then this is video 3 of a series of 8, because we're doing a comprehensive financial plan for them. And when we're going over Medicare, we're touching on IRA 401k because we're going to do some Roth conversions in the future. And they greatly affect Medicare IRMAA. How much of it can we stand, or we want to stay right below it? We've touched on income because we're going to be planning out a retirement income for them. And that creates their tax return essentially. But that's not the priority. The priority with the income is just giving them enough money to live and enjoy retirement. And then the last section that we touched was taxes. Is that tax planning is looking forward and looking over the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years and trying to smooth out their income to meet their needs, but also to reduce their overall tax bill over a total of retirement. Today, we're on long-term care insurance, long-term care planning. We're showing you the piece of that. We also want this video to stand alone as a lesson on about long-term care and long-term care planning. So if this is the first video you're watching, we want you to get a lot out of it. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because I want you to really plan for long term care. Of all the topics we talk about, everything we go over, this is going to be the most impactful thing you could do for your family. If you need care, this would upend all the other planning if you don't have a plan in place. We'll get to some examples later. But of everything we do, and I've lived it personally, Hans has lived it personally, this is the hardest thing, one, to plan for and talk about and think about. But if you're going through it, living through it is just extremely difficult. And it's who ends up bearing the burden is your family, it's your kids, it's your loved ones. And so you do this planning not for you, but you do it for them. And so I just want you to take this seriously. If you haven't really thought about it, please watch this, please listen to it, and then we'll get into the examples. You can find, I'm going to bring up the show notes here. You can find these at the link below our video. They're also on our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board that we'll get to in a second. Like Hans mentioned, we have a series that we're doing a series here, 8 videos where we're walking through sort of the process of doing the financial plan and actually showing the plan. In the show notes, we actually have the written plan that goes over that. There's a section about long-term care, these couple pages. We'll get to the numbers here as we go through the board. But look at this, read through the plan. Every plan is different, right? Because everyone's situation is different, but this is sort of the framework we use when we're doing financial planning. So let me turn it back to Hans, and we'll start going through the board here.
Okay. So Tom, 67, almost 68. Susan, 66. She's turning 67 in the fall. Tom is retiring in October. So we've known him for 3 years because he came to us when he was turning 65. He was watching the videos. He knew we're experts on Medicare, came to us. And in the last episode, we put all the planning we've done for Tom and Susan and the insurance, the Medicare supplement insurance, the IRMAA planning, all of that kind of stuff we had already done for them. And then they've been watching the videos consistently, and they knew and they've learned that we know a lot about income planning and IRA 401k planning, and they really hired us to do the comprehensive financial plan over all of those things, financial and being able to pay less taxes being able to have a guaranteed income into the future. Um, that's what they were sold on, and they very gladly paid us for the financial plan. They really didn't want to talk about long-term care. I mean, because we've brought this up every time we've talked to them, and we've kind of gotten a little bit of a, not a little bit of a, pretty, but it's just like, no, we're not going to, we are self-funded. Okay. They actually said self-insured, and then I was able to move them to a better definition, because self-insured is really kind of, you can't be self-insured because insurance spreads the risk around everybody. And if it happens to you, self-funded just means I'm going to use my own money to pay for it. And that's really where they were. And so we're going to start this video, which I think is more important than going over the plan that we're recommending and the solution, which they're buying. We want to go over, like, what was it that moved them to actually do something about this? So I'm going to push it to Tom, and I want Tom to share with you a little story about Tom and Susan.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it is interesting because we run into this a lot when we're doing planning, is they have a current advisor, someone they've worked with, which is okay. Like, we do a lot of planning where we're not taking over the management of the money, but we're still laying out a plan. And we bring up long-term care and they go back to the advisor, and the advisor says, "Oh, you can self-fund or self-insure, you can pay for it if it happens." um, which, you could run the numbers, and objectively maybe they could. And that's not really the crux of the issue here, and I'll get to an example in a second. But for Tom and Susan, what really changed their mind, what really got them back wanting to talk to us about this, was in between when we first talked to them about this 3 years ago and now, is Susan's mom started needing care. And Susan is having to step up and provide some of that care to her mom. And she's seen what that actually looks like, right? It wasn't that her mom didn't have money and could pay for somebody. She was just unwilling to do it. She didn't want to pay somebody. And so who she taps on the shoulder to come help is Susan and her siblings. And we see this play out. I could spend the whole day talking about story after story where we see this play out. And it's awful, right? I mean, it's hard, it's emotional, it's literally very difficult work at times, picking up, moving people around if they need to be, if that needs to happen. I mean, it's just an awful situation to look at. And Susan saw what that was doing to her, what her mom was going through, what that was doing to her and her family. And she's like, there is no way I'm putting my children through this. And that's really, once people understand that, that's really what gets them to move on planning around this. And so, again, if you've never been through that, you don't have that experience, learn from other people's experience, right? I mean, and I've been through care needs myself, right? My wife had to take care of me, and it's just hard work, and we were young and healthy, right? I mean, it's just difficult. And imagine you being, in your 60s, if you're the adult child taking care of him, or if you're a spouse and you're in your 80s trying to take care of a spouse. It's awful. Let me give you one more story just to sort of drive this point home. Is we're dealing right now with, it's one of my friends whose his grandmother is the one needing care. And so she's, gone into the hospital, been sent to rehab, which is pretty typical, but it's becoming more and more evident that she's not going to be able to go home. Like, she's going to have to stay in this rehab and it turn more into a long-term care type situation. Medicare is right at the point that they start kicking them off, right, where they stop paying for the care. Again, we can dig into that a little bit, but I mean, Medicare will pay for up to 100 days. The critical comment in there is up to 100. Most times it doesn't last that long. If you get to about day 20, 21, they start trying to say, hey, we're going to stop paying. Again, there's reasons for that I don't want to get into today, but they're right in that moment. And now my friend's mom is the one stepping in, trying to help coordinate stuff. And luckily, the grandmother had a long-term care policy, so I'm trying to work with them, help them walk through how that claim process looks. And the mom doesn't really understand it. She's confused. She's upset that it's not paying more, right? I mean, it's only paying $150 a day. What is this? Like, the cost is $400 a day. Which again, the cost is what the cost is, and her benefits are, but that means she's not having to pay $150 she would otherwise. So we're trying to walk through all that. And then we get to the point where it's clear, like, the long-term care is not going to cover all of it. She's got a pension, she's got Social Security, that takes a chunk out of the bill too, but there's still a leftover amount. Luckily, grandma has, $1.5 million of investment. She has money, right? And this gets to that question: if I can self-fund this, she's got the money there. And guess the first place the mom's going to think about how do we raise this money? Do we need to sell the house? Was the comment she threw out. It's like, wait a minute, why are we wanting to go sell the home? You have money here. From tax reasons, it doesn't make sense to sell the home. You're missing out on the step up in basis, all these different things. But that's where people go to, right? I mean, it's in crisis mode. They're not thinking logically because at the end of the day, she's got the money to pay for it, but she's not the one making the decisions, right? It's the kids making the decisions. It's stressful, it's hard. You don't make good financial decisions. What a long-term care policy does is you have the funding taken care of. It's like, okay, if I need it, I have this policy to turn to, and my kids aren't having to figure out where are we getting money from. And so even for the people who have enough to self-fund, it's still important to plan for it. It's still important to have a plan in place. We're proponents of using long-term care to do it because you get the leverage from the insurance company. There's tax benefits Hans will go over in a second. But again, I think having something there, having thought through what this looks like, really prevents your kids from having to go into crisis management and start doing rash things to try to pay for whatever the care needs. So, again, I could go on and on, story after story. Those are just a couple examples, but learn from other people's experiences, right? If other people who've lived through this are the ones that are wanting to plan for it, think about that and say, okay, do I want to put my kids through that? And I can just tell you right now, you don't want to do that. Your kids are still going to be involved, but you don't want them being the ones giving the actual care day in and day out. So, Hans, let me turn it back to you and we can go through more of the things that brought them back to plan for this policy.
Yeah. I mean, being self-funded or self-insured, frankly, is where everybody is until they buy long-term care insurance. I mean, that is your plan by default. And I agree with most people that tell me I'm self-insured and I'm self-funded. I got enough money. If this happens to me, I'll pay for it myself. And my answer to that is, okay, you do have enough money, and you will pay for it yourself. And the real question is, do you want to do that? Does that make sense? Is that and so just think about that for a little bit. And as far as Tom's story, Medicare is going to pay a little bit on the front end of most claims. I mean, most people, because you get out of the hospital when you're up there in years and you've had something where you've been in the hospital for 6, 8, 10, 12 days or whatever, they can't send you home. They push you to rehab, which is another term for nursing home. And most people in rehab, they get skilled care versus custodial care. And but it doesn't matter what you call it, is when you get downgraded from skilled care to custodial care, that's the point at which Medicare is going to cut you off. They may not kick you out of there, it's just Medicare is going to quit paying for it. So the answer on the Medicare thing is it's going to pay a limited amount, maybe help with your elimination period or waiting period on your long-term care insurance, or maybe give you a little time to dip into your own resources. So what I want to get onto is that this couple, Tom and Susan, they were described self-funded, and really Tom and I were saying to ourselves is that self-funded with a lot of people, or self-insurance, is just a way to keep the conversation at bay. Who wants to sit around in their retirement, especially people with a lot of money, and think about long-term care, nursing home, all that kind of stuff? I'd rather not think about it. So I'm just going to, before I dig into it, I'm just going to say I'm going to be all right. I'll just use my money to solve the problem. And that doesn't look very good 20 years from now. So what moved Tom and Susan, and Tom already gave you the answer to that, is Susan's mother had an incident, which is kind of, they were still self-funded, and Tom's over there, well, that happens to us. In fact, they're going to inherit money from Susan's mother, so that the money's going to compound, making them even more self-funded. But it opened the door a crack. And so we went through a process, and then them hiring us to do this financial plan, which they weren't looking for long-term care. It gave us a chance to really have some discussions like we're doing on this video. And I can tell you the effect on their kids and on each other, on the healthy spouse, is once people take a look at that, is like if I all of a sudden had a stroke at 80, and now I had the option to come home. The only reason I have an option to come home is I've already spent 2 weeks in the rehab, is because my wife is going to be there and she's going to somehow try to provide me the care. But we're going to be hiring an agency, and that's going to really, in effect, be a privilege where now I'm going to be back home, live my life, but I'm certainly not going to be dependent on her to be a full-time caregiver because she's going to be 79 when I'm 80, and plus she has a life. So the insurance comes in where if the insurance company's paying for it, all parties are going to be all for collecting it. And when you start bringing the kids in and people start thinking about that, when all of a sudden Tom and Susan's kids are in the same situation Susan's in right now with her mother, people start thinking about that. I don't want my kids to have to disrupt their lives. I'm certainly hoping that they come visit me regularly, and I think they will. And we're going to communicate and bring the grandkids around. But do I think they're going to come and take care of me, or do I want that? The answer is no. So the effect on the whole family is really the number one reason that Tom and Susan started looking at this seriously. And then we're going to jump over to the tax-free benefits. So when I dig back into the self-funded and you start thinking about, okay, so I'm going to have to pay this 10 grand a month or 12 grand a month or 8 grand a month every month for years, and I'm going to have to pull that out of my assets. What's that going to look like tax-wise? I mean, how much, to get 10 grand a month, I'm going to have to pull out 16, 18 grand out of my IRA to be left with 10 to pay to pay the assisted living bill or the home health care bill. So what am I going to have to sell? Am I going to have to sell assets that I otherwise wanted to pass on to the kids? Am I going to have to disrupt charitable giving? I mean, there's just a whole bunch of stuff around taxes that was really influential with Tom. Yeah, Tom Griffith, you want to respond to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things when you are self-funding, that means you have to sell investments. Presumably, it's probably not all sitting in cash. When this time comes, when you need to pay for the care, um, what will the market be doing at that time? Who knows, right? The market's not sitting around waiting for the perfect time for you to need care. The care is going to happen when the care happens, regardless of what's going on in the economy, right? It doesn't matter. And the worst thing that could happen is that happens right when we're in a downturn. Now, is that likely? I mean, who knows, right? We don't know when the care, and that's just it, is you just don't know. And so let's say in the best case scenario, markets are up. So you're not selling at a low point, you have the money to pay for it. Now we got to deal with taxes, right? So now you got to sell the investments. Are we pulling it out of an IRA? Are we pulling out of non-qualified accounts? If it's non-qualified, you're dealing with capital gains. If it's coming out of a traditional IRA, you're dealing with ordinary income taxes, driving up your AGI, which has a lot of impacts across the tax return, right? IRMAA is one of them. Tax rates are higher. I mean, it has huge impacts there. So now maybe we get the money to pay for the healthy spouse, or the sick spouse, but the surviving spouse, the healthy spouse, they're having to pay a higher cost for their Medicare. They're having to pay higher taxes. They have less money to do what they want to do and live their life. So it's impacting them, and you're drawing down the inheritance, right? And unfortunately, I've seen many cases where kids step in, they're the ones managing this, and they start skimping out on the care, right? You kind of hope that's not the case, and a lot of times it's not. But certainly, you can I sit across the table from them, and they're like, well, do they really need that? Can we sort of get by on this, right? And really, what ultimately is in their eyes is we're spending our inheritance now, and we don't want to. And you don't want to put your kids in a position that they have to pick between those two situations, right? Now, I would say more often than not, kids are willing to do it. They want to take care of mom and dad, but it's not all the time. And so again, self-funding is an option, and like Hans mentioned, that is your default option without a plan in place. But I think again, this is a better way from a tax perspective. It's a more known quantity. You know what you're dealing with. You're not worrying about market timing, and you're not worrying about taxes if the need arises.
Yeah. So the tax-free benefits of the money coming out of the back end of the policy that can go on for years is all tax-free. And that's just, that's huge. And by the way, is if Tom and Susan are self-funded 20 years from now, it's not going to be Tom or Susan selling the assets. It's going to be their kids. And now we're back to the thing is that's who's going to be dealing with your money when you're 85 or 90 and collecting on these policies or doing your self-funded thing, it's not even going to be you doing it. It's going to be your adult children in most cases. So the third deal is that really convinced him to do this is the example we're going to give. We're able to purchase it with a lump of IRA money. The IRA money's just been sitting there, untaxed, growing, which is a good thing. Now he's retiring. He knows that minimum distributions are in the not too distant future, and so we can buy this with a single premium, one time, never to pay again, with a transfer from the IRA where it is now into an IRA at the insurance company. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff going to go on after that. The fact that he could do that really perked him back. I already talked about RMDs, is that there's an element within this we're going to show you in a minute where there's going to be a money coming out of that IRA every year to pay for the policy for 10 years. That money coming out of there counts toward your RMD when you ultimately get there. It has a death benefit, so it's going to share that if they put this 300,000 in there, it's over there in an IRA. Then we deplete that and put it into the long-term care life insurance hybrid policy. And then we never use the thing for long-term care. Then there's going to be a life insurance benefit that's going to go to the kids or the heirs afterwards. So all is not lost if they don't end up not needing the long-term care. And then the last area is really an emphasis on the home health care benefits. People that have resources, they have a nice home. There's two of them around now. Maybe when this happens, there might only be one of them, but nonetheless, people generally want to stay in their own home if it's at all possible. I know in my own personal plan, I'm going to go to the assisted living kicking and screaming. I want it all to happen right here at home, and I don't want my wife to do it. I want the insurance policy to pay the home health care agency that's going to come in and take care of me. And once we explained all of that to Tom and Susan, this all made sense. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, all these six are sort of the reason that they were considering it. But again, taking us back to number one, which really is the most important one, is the impact it has on your family. Your family, kids. Like, you do this planning, you buy insurance like this for them, not for you, even though you're the one receiving the care, right? It's protecting them from that. All the other ones, in my experience, are ways to help justify it. Gets you a little bit more excited about it. You can start making, justifying your mind why you want to do this. The numbers need to work, right? So don't get me wrong. The policy needs to make sense. It needs to be part of a larger plan. We can't just throw a bunch of money at this if we don't include it as part of making sure we're not limiting the amount that you have to spend. So again, it needs to be part of a larger plan. But at the end of the day, it's the kids, it's the family. That's the reason that a lot of this planning got done, specifically with Tom and Susan here. And so, what we're going to do, sort of the next portion here, is walk through the actual example. Like, we have the example, what we recommended for Tom and Susan. Like Hans mentioned, it's using IRA money, which is unique to this company. And so what's nice about that is that's where a lot of people's savings are, right? That it's in the IRA, it's in the 401k, money that hasn't been taxed yet. They don't necessarily have a plan for it. And so that's what we really are going to do here. I do want to show that in the show notes of that we have, that we went over a little bit earlier, at the very bottom of the show notes, we actually have the proposal, the full proposal of the long-term care plan. It's here. If you want to look at more of the details, we got page by page. A lot of these numbers are represented on the board here. So I'm going to turn it back to Hans and he'll go over highlights, but just know the full proposal is in those show notes right at the very bottom. You got to scroll through a bunch of pages, but we're down at the bottom is the show notes for this long-term care policy.
Okay. So just getting back to our whole picture of what we're doing for Tom and Susan is we're preparing a comprehensive financial plan that covers the 7 areas that are on the board here. And specifically today, we're talking about long-term care. And then now we're moving into the recommendation of this is the policy that we're recommending Susan and Tom purchase. And they're going to. And we're touching a few of the other areas because we're using IRA money to purchase it. The $300,000 that's going to buy this policy is coming out of the IRA. It's going into another IRA, but it's coming out of there. And there's also a little bit of a tax effect. And so we're touching a lot. So I just want people to understand this recommendation is in light of everything we're doing for them. Okay. So let's talk about why would you want to do this? What are the benefits? If one of the two of them went in assisted living tomorrow, or they had a bad accident and tomorrow they're going to need home health care, somebody's going to come in, and right now in 2026, their monthly benefit for either home health care or assisted living, nursing home, adult daycare, $6,864 a month. Okay. Now, that would be paid out immediately. Now, next year, 12 months from now, that 6864 would go up by 3% and 3% the next year and 3. So it has an inflation factor on there that lasts 20 years. So that's going to get them to 87 and 86 before the inflation stops. And when we are 20 years from now, in the year 2046, their maximum benefit is going to be 148,000. Okay, and the monthly benefit is going to be 12,397 a month. So when they're actually using this, the point I wanted to make, most likely they're going to get more than 6,800 a month out of it. So it has, the benefits go up over time. There's no increase in the premium, or there's no changes in the premium for that. That benefit, as we said earlier, comes to you tax free, so you don't have to pay taxes on that. And the overall maximum on the policy, on this particular policy, is impossible to state because there's no time limit on it. In other words, Susan could develop dementia at 75, start needing home health care at 77, and she could still be living in an assisted living at 97. And for those whole 20 years, this monthly benefit would be paid out to them. So it's unlimited in that aspect. And the whole time, she's also not using up Tom's benefit either. So Tom's over here. If he needed care, his benefit is the same as hers, even if they needed it at the same time. Now they're paying out two benefits. The important thing to understand is the whole thing doesn't have an overall maximum or a cap on it. It could go on as long as you're alive. That's one of the reasons we favor this company. And because most people buying long-term care insurance are looking at, if I use this, there's a high chance that, that dementia or Alzheimer's or something with memory loss is going to be involved. I don't want a time frame because I may outlive my long-term care policy. That can't happen with this. Now, the death benefit on this policy is 433,552. Okay. And what that means is if Tom and Susan never used it, and they both were killed like quickly in a car accident or something like that, their heirs would get paid 433,000. Part of that is just sending their IRA money back to them, to their kids. And then part of it is the actual death benefit in the life insurance portion of the policy. So I don't want to get too detailed. If they die after the 10 years, so they die, both of them die 77 or after without using it, the death benefit on the policy is 164,000. So, but the death benefits are not really what you're buying for. That's just like a refund feature back to your estate if you didn't use it. So I want to push it to Tom. I want Tom to just talk a little bit about those benefits before I get into this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the questions that we'll get often is this enough, right? Is this going to pay for all possible levels of care? And the answer is probably no, right? I mean, care is expensive, and we don't need to insure the whole risk. But, if we were to need care, and let's say we were needing it, I don't know, 15 years in the future, somewhere around there, and you're getting 10 grand a month, you know, albeit the cost is going to be higher 10 years from now, right? It's going to be more expensive, but that is still going to be a very meaningful amount of money coming in that's not coming out of your portfolio to help cover that cost. And so, does it cover everything? Probably not in all scenarios. Does it cover a lot of care? Absolutely. I mean, it's very meaningful. And again, not everyone can afford 300,000, right? So that's where the planning comes into place, right? Is we need to look at the assets that you have. We need to look at sort of your income because we can't put money aside that's really earmarked for long-term care if it means you're not able to live and do the stuff you want to do now. So there's always that balancing act. And that's again why we would like to do this as part of a larger plan, as opposed to just focusing in on one area like long term care. But assuming we've checked all those boxes and we can set some money aside, getting that leverage of lifetime benefits, that literally there is no way that you could do that by self funding. Like there is no investment out there that would produce an unlimited amount of money to pay for care at the level that we're talking about here. And so, especially in those longer situations of care, 8, 10 years, typically that's memory issues, dementia, Alzheimer's, those type of things. You couldn't self-fund that. There is literally no way you could do that. The long-term care policy is nice that it covers that. And the other thing that we like about the lifetime benefits when we have a couple, especially, is one spouse is not worried about using up the other spouse's benefits. Right. I mean, we had a couple last year that was going through, the husband needed care, and he had sort of forgotten the specifics of the policy. He had the lifetime benefits. He did not want to start the care because he said, I don't want to use up my wife's benefits. I mean, he was very firm on that. We had to remind him, it's like, listen, I understand that you're looking out for your wife, you love her, which is great. However, your policy, you literally can't, right? It's unlimited. You can't use up her benefits. You need care now. Let's bring some people in to help take care of you. And so it just removes that concern from a couple with having that unlimited benefits. Now, does everyone need unlimited benefits? No. I mean, there's a cost there, right? I mean, if you got a smaller policy, it lasted less amount of time, it would cost less. And that's where building it through sort of a plan is helpful, is sort of fine tuning what that looks like. But again, this made a lot of sense in their plan. Back to the earlier comment, is they were wanting to do this because they saw what that looked like when they were taking care of Susan's mom, and they didn't want to put their kids through it. So again, it fit well with them. They were still healthy enough to qualify, right? But that's the other piece of it, is some people say, "Oh, I like it, but I'm going to wait. I'm going to put this off 5 years, and I'll be ready to do it then." You might not be able to do it then, right? I mean, it's going to be more expensive by waiting, but that's not the bigger issue. The bigger issue is you could get sick between now and now you might not be able to get it because there is underwriting. It's not as strict as some of the policies out there, but it's still pretty strict, right? You can't have real serious stuff going on. They'll just say, this policy particularly will just say, we're not going to take you. Now we have other options available, so we're not going to get to that in this show. We have other videos on that. But just know the cost of waiting is there's a risk that you couldn't buy this in the future, just literally because your health prevents you from doing so.
Okay. So now I just want to go over what we do with the 300 grand. So your 300,000 for Tom and Susan is over in their IRA. It's part of an excess of $1 million. They have a pretty large IRA. And so that's going to be done by custodian to custodian transfer over to an IRA at the insurance company. Okay, that $300,000 is there to fund the long-term care life insurance policy. The insurance company is going to add $75,000 of interest to that, which makes a total of $375,000. And the $375,000 is going to be transferred out of there year by year for 10 years. So that equals $37,500 a year for 2026 through 2035. Each one of those 10 years, there's going to be a transfer from the IRA of $37,500 into the long-term care life policy. And that transfer is going to be complete at the end of 10 years. So the value of this IRA 10 years from now will be zero, and all the money will be transferred into the life long-term care policy. And it's that policy over here that produces all these benefits. So this is what you're after. And what this does is spreads those IRA distributions out evenly over the next 10 years. And so when Tom turns 73 and he has to start RMDs, he's going to have 37,500 of his RMD made every year for him. And that's going to last another, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. and then that'll all be complete. So there's a bunch of accounting that needs to go on, and there is going to be a tax bill that they're going to have to pay the taxes on that 37,500. When you look at the whole financial plan that we're going to get to in the subsequent videos, this will be accounted for. All of this will be accounted for inside of the financial plan. So you're going to actually be able to go in and look at it. So what I want to do is just position all this again in terms of that's what we're doing the 8 videos on. This is the 4th one about the financial plan for Tom and Susan. This was the recommendation for them. And we've done Social Security for them. Their Social Security checks combined are over $6,000 a month. We talked about Medicare in the last one. We talked about a little bit about Medicare in this one, long-term care, and then we're using IRA money to fund this thing, but we're not distributing it all at once. We are creating an income, and we're taking this into consideration because when we get to the 6th video, we're going to get into the income and investment plan for Tom and Susan, and this will all be mixed into that. As far as estate planning, this thing has a death benefit. So if people think, well, I'm going to go through my whole life and not use it, what do I get back out of it? Well, you get a life insurance benefit. And then we've already talked about taxes. Everything we do, especially when we're doing a financial plan, all has a tax effect. And the real benefit of these financial plans is not like the recommendation we did in one area. We mix all 7 of these things together and the recommendations, and then we predict out into the future. We make projections of these things all bouncing against each other. This is episode 5 of 8, and what we're talking about today is specifically for Tom and Susan, what decisions we've made around their 401k IRA. So I want to push it to Tom. I want Tom, why are we doing this video today?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because Tom and Susan, and this is pretty typical for most people that walk through the door, most of their savings is in an IRA and a 401k. This is money that has not been taxed yet. It's been tax deferred. They've saved the taxes up to this point, but now they're facing retirement and they have to come up with a plan of how to pull it out and how to pay taxes. And ultimately, we need to do this in a way that lets them keep more of their money, right? The less in taxes they pay, the more they get to keep. So it's important to have a strategy around this. And that's going to include things like Roth conversion, QCDs. We'll get into all this stuff during the show, but you need to have a plan around your IRA because if you don't, you're going to be on the government's plan. And I'll just tell you, that's going to be in their favor, not necessarily in yours. And so let me bring up the show notes. You can find these at the below the link in our video. They're also at our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board, and then like Hans mentioned, we have a couple sort of tax planning charts. We'll refer back to these, and then we have the plan that we've written. This is we have a series. This is the 5th video of 8. We're really talking about the IRA, but you can see the plan here, sort of all the different pieces. We have a section that talks about RMDs, QCDs, Roth conversions. There's a section of the plan that goes over all of this. I'm going to turn it back to Hans. We're going to go through the board, and then we're actually going to get back in a little bit later into the software where we sort of do the modeling, where we sort of fine tune what level of Roth conversions that we recommended for Tom and Susan. And then ultimately, if we do a plan for you, that's how we would come to the recommendation for you.
Yeah, we want to make each one of these videos that we do stand by itself. So in other words, you can watch this thing and you can learn things about what you need to do in your IRA 401k planning. And it's generally for people in their 50s or 60s. Because once you get to be 70 and beyond, you can still watch these videos and learn, but all of this stuff is live and well. You already know about it because you found out about it through the management of your IRA. So one of the questions that I'll ask is that why do we have a specific section of the financial plan that only deals with your IRA 401k money? And why don't we just take that and just mix it into the investment and income worry? Because we're going to take the IRA money and we're going to plug it into all of this after we're done here. So this video today is answering that question. So why do we do? There's three things that every financial plan that we look at relative to your money and relative to you, and that's RMDs, required minimum distributions. And I would ask you, what is your distribution plan for your IRA or 401k? And then, I'm supposed to shut up at this point and let you answer. And you might want to write that one down. What is my distribution plan? Do I have one? And the good news is, if you don't have one, the government one has one already made for you. And it's starting at 73 or 75. Tom wanted to speak to that for a second.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions that we often get is, what is my RMD age? A lot of people know that it exists, right? They know there's some date that they have to take it. It used to be 70 and a half, and then they change it to 72, and then they change it to 73, and now maybe 75. So it's all over the place. And it's important for you to know what your age is. And so let me just sort of simplify this as best I can. If you were born prior to 1960, so 1959 or earlier, have a date of birth, your RMD age now is 73. If you were born after or 1960 and after, your RMD age is 75. I will just make a side note here. This is ignoring people who have been on RMDs for a while. Your RMD age, if you'd already started before they made these rules, you don't get to recalculate it. But if you haven't started yet, prior to 1960, 73, 1960 and after, 75. Keep that in mind because it's important to know when you start doing some of this other planning.
Okay, so we're going to look at Tom and Susan. Tom Tom was born in 1958, so he's 73 in 2031. His first RMD is due 4/1/2032, and his second RMD is due by 12/31/2032, and Susan is just a year later. So why are you talking about that? 2032 is a ways away. Well, we want to know when this is, and we're doing a financial plan that's going to cover 30 years or longer for Tom and Susan, or just one of them that's a survivor. And so we need an RMD plan. We need to make sure that whatever we create satisfies RMDs in an intelligent way. And so the point I want to make out of this is, a lot of people just read the rules themselves. They put off doing anything till 2031 if they're Tom, or 2032. And they actually read in the rules, well, I got all the way till April 1st, the year after I turned 73, to do my first RMD, and you do. So you could do it in February or March of 2032. But the problem comes in is you'll have two RMDs that year, because that's only the first year you can wait till April. All the years subsequent to the year you turn 73, you're going to have to take it during the year. So watch out for that mistake, where all of a sudden you're going to have two RMDs during one tax year, and it's going to make the problem worse. So Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think they really put that very first one in April to give you a little bit of a grace period, right? It's your first year. Maybe you don't know how it works and you sort of missed it. And they said give you some time to fix it. If you are planning ahead like we're doing, very rarely would we recommend wait till April because, like Hans mentioned, that means you have two in that same year. And so, in reality, what we typically recommend is you take the RMD in the year you turn 73, or for older people or for younger people when they turn 75. But again, I think taking it in the year you turn that age helps prevent two in a single year. But it's absolutely true is you can wait until April 1st of the following year just on the very first RMD, not any subsequent ones, but the very first one. They give you a little bit of a grace period. But if you're watching this video and we're planning for you, probably we're not going to wait till then. We want to take the first one in the year you turn, whatever age, 73 or 75.
So Tom, you had something to say when we were preparing about, well, first of all, Tom and Susan, like, how big of a deal was it that we looked at RMDs for them? And then you said that there's some people who really don't need to worry about RMDs because they need the income from their IRA, and that in and of itself. So could you make that comment?
Sure. So when we have people come in and they're all gung ho about tax planning, want to do Roth conversions, do all these QCDs and stuff, I say, well, let's take a step back first and look at what income needs you have. Because I think the first place you want to start in this retirement plan is making sure your income is taken care of. And if most of your money is in IRAs and you need to live off some of that, which is a lot of people, then you might not have an issue from an RMD standpoint, right? The income you're pulling out already could be enough to satisfy that RMD requirement. And so we need to know it. We need to make sure we're taking enough. So I don't want you to ignore it, but we might not need to take any extra steps. I get a question a lot of times is people are living off their IRA. They know this RMD age is coming up and they're worried they have to take more above and beyond what they're already taking. And it depends on the balances. It depends on how much they're taking out. But that might not be true. That might be that their income alone is enough to satisfy that. And we don't have much of an issue to worry about. So, in all of this tax planning, especially around the IRA and the 401k, step one is seeing, do you need to live off this money? And if so, how much? And then we go from there, right? Once we've solved the income need, and we'll have a future video where we talk more about that for Tom and Susan. But once we've solved the income need, then we look to see how much room left do we have to do some of this other planning, like Roth conversions, maybe taking advantage of QCDs. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But we want to start with the income need first, make sure that's covered, and then we'll do larger tax planning from there. I think a bad place to start is taxes. You end up doing all your planning around taxes, and you might wake up the next day and have no income to live off of. I think that would be a bad situation to end up in. So let's start with the income need, make sure we've solved for that. And then if there's future tax planning to do above and beyond that or within that, that's how I like to approach it. So I think again, just in your situation, make sure the income's taken care of. If we need to live off the IRA, let's do that first within reason, right? We need to make sure we're not living off too much. But then we do the rest of the tax planning from there.
Okay, I just want to stand back. I pulled this stuff right out of their plan. And so if you want to go into the show notes and go to the IRA 401k section, you're going to see this all planned out, all the things Tom is saying and I'm saying is going to be right in their plan. And it's my experience that people that don't do financial planning in their 60s, they don't look at any of this till they're 73 and it's right in front of them and they can't make any decisions. Now, next point I want to make is when we're going to talk about qualified charitable distributions, they don't start till 70 and a half. So why are we talking about them for Tom and Susan? They're 67 and 66, turning 1 year older. But they're still a couple of years away. And answering my own question, why are we talking about it now? Because it's part of the planning is when they get to 70 and a half, when Tom gets there, they're charitably inclined. We're going to start planning to give a little bit of their IRA away to charity every year because they told us to. And we're going to do that in a very tax efficient way. Now, the point I wanted to make, we're still on RMDs, is when you do a QCD, when you donate, you're older than 70 and a half, and you donate part of your IRA to charity, that counts toward your RMD. So it's actually pretty cool, and we bake that right into our financial plans. Now, when we talk about QCD, I just told you how Tom and Susan are doing. They're charitably inclined. They're already giving money every year to charity. And so what we're going to do at the very least is have them shift their current charitable giving to a QCD once they reach 70 and a half. And then possibly add to that because they have a desire to give more. And when they could see that they can do that through their IRA, it's very tax efficient to do a QCD that way. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful to maybe just define what this QCD is. Again, it stands for Qualified Charitable Distribution. It's when you give money directly out of your IRA to a qualified charity. A lot of people do it to their church. You could do it to nonprofits. Again, it needs to be a 501c charity. But again, it's a wonderful way to do your giving if you're already charitably inclined. If you don't have any intention to give to charity, this is not a reason to start giving because you are giving the money away, right? But anyone who is wanting to give some away, this is a wonderful way to do it right out of the IRA. Again, you have to be 70 and a half first, right? So that's one of the limitations. But once you hit that point, it's great, right? Because you have this IRA money that you put in there. When you put the money into those accounts, you got a tax deduction. So that's saved on taxes then. It's grown tax deferred. So you haven't had to pay tax on any of the growth and you get to give it away tax free. I mean, there's not very many things in the tax code that money never gets taxed. This is one of them. So any people who want to do giving, certainly should look into this because it's a wonderful way to do it. And once you hit RMD age, you can then use that QCD to satisfy the RMD, assuming you don't need to live off the IRA, right? I mean, if you're living off the IRA and getting an income, you might already satisfy the RMD requirement. So this isn't going to, the QCD in that situation might not necessarily help from an RMD standpoint, but it's still a great way to do your giving, right? It's still a great way to do the charitable gifts. There's some nuances starting in 2026 now with Trump's one big beautiful bill that he signed, where people who typically in the past you had to itemize deductions to take to get a benefit from the charitable gift. Most people were just taking the standard deduction, so they weren't getting any benefit. So this was great for those people. Starting in 2026, now you can take up to $2,000 if you're married of charitable deduction, even if you take the standard deduction. So I don't want to get too far in those weeds. There's some planning around there, but just know that there's some nuance there, and that's why a plan is helpful, is just to lay this out sort of piece by piece. But again, IRA money giving to charities, it's wonderful. One other small point, and I'll turn it back to Hans, is to do a QCD, it needs to be in an IRA. A lot of times in our show, we're talking about IRA, 401k, and we're using those terms interchangeably. This is one that you cannot do that. 401ks you cannot do a QCD on a 401k. It has to be in an IRA to be able to take advantage of this.
Okay. So next up, Roth conversions. And this is where people start calling us as soon as we talk about Roth conversions, and people come in thinking maybe the whole plan is Roth conversions, and I guess it can be, but you come to us. First of all, you do a financial plan. We're going to go through all 7 of these things and apply them to you. That's what this whole video series is about. But now we're into the important stuff to our people coming in the door is Roth conversions. And so the question is, first of all, yes or no, am I going to do them or not? And in Tom and Susan's case, they definitely wanted to do them. They knew enough about it. So then it became, the second question is, once the answer is yes, the second question is, how much and how often? And it really pays with Roth conversions to delay them over as long as we can, just because we're going to smooth out the taxes. But the flip side of that is we want to get them done in the 60s and early 70s because Roth conversions have the effect of reducing your RMD. I mean, in other words, if you do some Roth conversions, it's like in Tom and Susan, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 7. When they get to 73, they're going to have a smaller RMD than they otherwise would have. And then once they have that RMD, they have to take it. You can't convert an RMD. And that's a place that a lot of people. So this whole video is not necessarily a school in Roth conversions, but it is a little bit. And we're taking you through Tom and Susan and what they did. And what we chose for them is the beginning of IRMAA. So I just laid out with a typical client, we're going to start typically at the top of the 24% married tax bracket. If it's a couple, which is 403,000. So that's their income's 403,000. Excuse me. Their income is probably 180,000 or 200,000 or 150,000. And that means that there's a gap of about $250,000 that would be eligible to do a Roth conversion and pay the taxes. And the most taxes that we would pay is 24%. And that's pretty attractive to a lot of people. So with Tom and Susan, we went lower than that. And we used 218,000 as the cap, where, that's the IRMAA threshold, the Medicare. How much are my Medicare Part B premiums going to be affected by these Roth conversions? And I'm telling you, this person that's using the 24, it's probably high, So anyhow, I want to push you to Tom, and Tom's going to go into the software that we use to create Tom and Susan's plan and kind of show you what I've just been talking about.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a common thing that people they watch our video, they're following our channel, they reach out to do a plan. Roth conversions almost inevitably comes up, right? This is one of the areas that I think we talk a lot about, we give a lot of advice on, and it drives a lot of people in, honestly. I mean, that's where they're really coming to us for. And so what we like to do is again, we're building the whole plan. We like to look at everything, right? Because all of these things are connected with each other, which hopefully you've seen throughout these series of videos. And so we can't just look at Roth conversions in a vacuum, right? We need to look at it as part of the larger picture. But certainly, it's a great way to do some tax planning. I want to take us through sort of our thought process of how we arrived at the amount we've recommended for Tom and Susan. And I will just let you know when we're doing a plan for you, this is a collaborative approach, right? It's not just like take it or leave it. Is we have lots of discussions back and forth. We show you different options. Really, what the goal is to get us to the same page of what we think is the best recommendation. Real quickly, I'm just going to walk you back through kind of where they started. This is where they are currently, right? They got about 230,000 in the bank. They've been good savers. They have Susan has like just under 100,000 in her IRA. Tom has about 1.6, 1.7 in his traditional IRA. They do have some Roth money that they've built up over time, and then some non-qualified money that's already been taxed in a brokerage account. So really what we're talking about here is this 1.6, 1.7 and her about 100,000 of IRA money that hasn't been taxed. What do we do there? And so I'm not going to go through the whole software. We have the very first video that we did on with Tom and Susan. We went through like the whole software and look at this, but I want us to go through and look at this tax section because this is where we really can get into the idea of the Roth conversions. And so I got to explain a little bit what we're looking at, and then I'll show you kind of how we approach this. So this blue shaded area, this is if they do no Roth conversions. They just stick to the government's plan, taking RMDs, taking money out that they need to live on, and then we just go on into the future. So you'll notice these different lines are the various tax brackets. So this orange line is the top of the 24%. The yellow line is the top of the 22%. This green line, which is kind of below this blue area, is the top of the 12%. And then this light blue line down below here is the 10%. They're clearly way above the 10%, filling up the 12%. So their income, when we look at sort of the RMDs and stuff, what that's projected to do is their income is going to be right into that 22% tax bracket. So at a base starting point, they're kind of at the bottom of the 22% tax bracket. And so now what we can do is say, okay, that's where we're starting. Now, what does this look like if we start doing Roth conversions? Let me show you sort of what we ended up from a recommendation standpoint is I can dial in different conversion targets, right? So I can do Medicare brackets, I can do tax brackets, I can do capital gains brackets. Through the conversations we have with them, we sort of arrived at the point that they don't like paying IRMAA. They've been paying because if you remember, Tom and Susan, they work for a small practice. He's the MD, and they had to sign up for Medicare when they turned 65 because they didn't have a credible coverage. And so they've been on Medicare. They've had a high income, paying a lot of IRMAA, and it really just gets under their skin. They don't like it. If they can avoid it, they would like to. So it's okay. Well, let's see what that looks like. And so I told the software, say, okay, I want you to convert up to the point where we're not having to pay any IRMAA. I will acknowledge that this is an estimate. All software projections, future looking are estimates. And so in reality, year by year, we'll sit down and help calculate this for them. But what the software does is, okay, we're going to convert up to that point. In 2026, the number is 218,000. Just as a reminder, that looks at your income from 2 years ago. We filed an appeal with Tom and Susan because their income 2 years ago were much higher. It's going to be lower. So again, we have a video that we talked about that already. But again, so we dial that up to no IRMAA, assuming that their kids, this estimated terminal tax rate, or how to read this is assuming their kids pay 30% tax on traditional IRA money left. If there's money left in a traditional IRA, when the kids inherit it and they have to pay 30% tax on that, that's that estimated terminal tax. So assuming that tax rate, how much better off are they, again, projected to be by doing the Roth conversions? And this is sort of the ending balance for the kids. It's over $500,000 to the positive, right? They're better off to the tune of 521,000. Side note on that is I don't pay a lot of attention to this exact number because there's so many assumptions that goes into this number. But when I'm comparing one strategy versus another, directionally is one strategy larger than the next one? That I think is helpful information. But again, based off the projections, over $500,000 to the positive, which they love. They said, this is great. We're getting money out. We're doing it over a slow period of time. You can see this green area is it's converting to about early 80s, and then you'll see the income drop off. That's dropping off because we're done with Roth conversions, which really just tells me that the balance has been converted. And now our income stays low underneath the 12% tax bracket. If I get rid of the blue area, you'll see that. So we're kind of right underneath the 12% bracket for the rest of the time, which is great. Some of the things that helps do: one, it gets money out in a controlled manner. We avoid IRMAA. We're building up the Roth account, which is great money to leave to the kids. Tom and Susan can access it tax free. The other thing it really is helpful in is avoiding this widow's tax. And so, you'll see as we have other videos, we talk about this, but the widow's tax is when the first spouse passes away immediately, or I guess the next year, that surviving spouse is paying taxes at the single tax filing rate, which is much higher, right? It's double, right? You get there twice as fast. And so the RMDs haven't changed. The IRA balance hasn't changed when the first spouse passes away. And the percentages in Tom and Susan's case, they're 1 year apart. So the RMD percentages are about the same. And so that income really doesn't change that much, but the tax brackets shrink. And so again, one benefit of the Roth conversions is while they're both still alive, is getting money out, avoiding that single tax filing rate at some point in the future, and doing that systematically. So that was where we ended up. But let me show you another consideration we had with them, because some people come in and they're really worried about future tax rates. They're convinced that tax rates will be higher in the future. Hans and I agree that at some point they will be higher. Now, when will that be? I mean, who knows? I mean, we don't have that crystal ball, and we're not in Washington. But just looking at where we are from a debt standpoint, they're going to have to raise revenues at some point, which would be raising taxes. And so some people say, I want to get this out much more quickly. And that's when we have on the board and say, okay, well, what if we went to the 24%? So this ordinary income tax bracket, then I can dial that into the 24% rate, hit refresh, and you'll notice it's a much faster conversion, right? So it only takes 3 or 4 years, and then we're done, and then it drops off significantly at that point. And so it's a much faster conversion. This number is actually a little bit higher, right? They're pretty close, but it's a little bit higher than what the IRMAA level was. But you are paying a lot more taxes to get there, and you're going to be paying IRMAA and different things. And so when we went over both scenarios with Tom and Susan, they liked the little bit slower approach. The other thing that allows them to do is it leaves money in the IRA for longer, allowing them to take advantage of the QCDs once they get to 70 and a half. It also, keeps them in the 22% tax bracket as opposed to the 24%, which they like that. And the big sort of deciding point is they just really did not like paying that IRMAA. In their plan, it worked that we could manage this staying below the IRMAA level. That is not always the situation. Sometimes people come in, say your IRA balance is double theirs or something like that, or your other income is higher. We might have to go above IRMAA, right? So I'm not saying all our plans stick to that IRMAA level, but it's something we look at, right? It's saying, okay, if you don't like it, can we manage that? Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. It's very dependent upon your situation. But again, that's something that we take into consideration. That's why doing the larger plan, I think, is effective, because we can take in different approaches, different considerations from all these aspects here. So, Hans, I don't know if you want me to go anything else with the software here.
Well, I think this is good, Tom. Thank you. Yeah. So this is the Roth conversion section. And, the other point I want to make is once we arrive at a strategy, that isn't baked for the next 30 years. Like Tom and Susan decided to just go right under IRMAA. The only thing that's really baked is their 2026 conversion rate, possibly their 2027 conversion rate. And then after that, we're going to be sitting down every year, refiguring this stuff, looking at what's happened, looking at the horizon. So these numbers throughout retirement, you're going to be recalculating them every year. We're just trying to use this software to see if, does it make sense to do it or not? And then if we're going to do it, how much and how often, and where does that get us? And then what's the end result? Because the real payoff for this are the kids that inherit the IRA, is they're not going to have to pay taxes on it at high tax rates. So those are the three things we look at in IRA Roth. And we talked about income. And so I just want to jump now into some considerations, some of which we've mentioned already. The widow tax. And the widow tax just means that when you're when two become one, the survivor is going to pay tax at single tax rates, and that really affects Roth conversions, and it affects RMDs. Um, just trust me on that. Tax rates in the future, Tom already mentioned that. We're going to want to hear what your opinion is. Do you think tax rates are going to be higher in the future? If they are, that's going to lean more toward Roth conversions. What's your state income tax situation, especially where you live now? Are you going to move and maybe move to a state without taxes? That can affect whether you do Roth conversions now or you wait. And if you do them now and you're not moving and you have a high state income tax, we got to factor that all into the equation. Funds, do you have funds outside of the IRA to pay the income tax due on the conversion? And that's important because, say you're going to convert 200,000 for the year and the extra tax calculated on that is 60,000. Okay. Are you going to take the 60,000 out of the 200,000, which will leave you 140,000 in the Roth? Or are you going to convert the whole 200,000 and pull the 60 grand for taxes out of some other account that you've already paid taxes? That makes a huge difference in all of that. And we need to know that, and we can plan that out. When will the Roth be needed? So that factor is that generally once we convert money, you have money, we're going to save that for the widower for income, and possibly save that. It's going to be the last money we spend because that's the money we want to pass on to the kids if that's important to you. The Roth has no RMDs, so that's part of the strategy of putting it there in the first place. So the government's not going to make you deal with the timing of your withdrawals. The IRMAA threshold, we talked about that in their plan. We talked about Congress as, you think Congress is going to tax our Roth IRAs. I certainly hope they don't, but we want to ask you what you think about that. And it would be a seriously going back on their word, but they could do that. They could just figure out some way to say, we're going to tax this money again. We want you thinking about that possibility when you're making a decision about this. Charitable intent with QCDs, I mean, it just matters. Do you have charitable intent? Because if you don't have charitable intent, it's hard to justify, a QCD just over the taxes. We just mentioned deathbed Roth conversions. This is a terrible place that Tom and I get put in, but when a couple is our clients and one of our clients dies and we're dealing with the widow and we're usually helping them with a bunch of stuff, but this is the last year of a joint tax return. And so it's the last chance we have at doing a Roth conversion where we could go up to this $403,000 level of income tax. And that's kind of a difficult conversation to have with a fresh widow. And we don't always engage in that, but just want to make out a point. There are many times a deathbed Roth conversion. Another place, well, that's not a deathbed Roth conversion, that's after death. But we have people with large estates, and they're calling us up, or their kids are calling us up, and they're going to pass away, but they still haven't yet, and they are of sound mind or the power of attorney. We can do a big Roth conversion before they die because the beneficiary can't convert that to a Roth. So anyhow, I don't want to get too far off in that. And the last joint tax return for a widow, I already covered that. So this is the 6th episode of our ongoing series of Cardinal lessons dealing with the financial plan for Tom and Susan. And today we're building their income plan and their investment plan. And frankly, a lot of people, they think CSPs, this is all we do, is we help you with your money. And we certainly do that, and we feel like we do it well. But this financial plan in this series that we're showing an example is going to cover all 7 of these areas, and it's going to show them all mixing together. So I want to bring Tom on. I want Tom to share, why are we doing this video today, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're doing this video Because when you really boil down people come in with all sorts of questions, about Roth conversions, Medicare, Social Security, investments. When you boil it all down to the base level, really what they want to know is, are they going to be okay in retirement? Do they have enough to be able to do the things they want to do when they want to do them and have that last the rest of their life? I mean, that's it. I mean, that's ultimately what really we're doing with a lot of these plans. And one of the most important pieces of that is the income, and specifically how much can they spend, right? I mean, if you have someone with, you know, $10 million, but they spend $1 million a year, the answer is no, you can't. When I have somebody with 200,000, but they only spend their social security check, they can. So it's all related to the income of what they're able to live off of. So we need to get really clear what that income plan is, show you how that works, and that's going to let you go into retirement with that confidence that you're going to be okay, not just now, but an 85-year-old self is going to be okay, right? We need to make sure this lasts for the rest of your life and not just like the next couple of years. And so let me bring up the show notes. You can find these at the link below our video. They're also on our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board. We have the plan that we've been going through this series. We're going to reference back to this as we go through the show here, but read through it. Again, every plan looks a little bit different. This is specific to Tom and Susan. But again, this is the typical sort of process we do when we're doing a financial plan for our clients. So let me turn it back to Hans, and we'll go through the board here.
Okay. So this is the 6th of 8 shows. And in the beginning one, the first one goes over what we're doing. And then the next 7 just go down the boxes, and it shows the part of their financial plan. Like when we were doing Social Security, the first one, which is Social Security planning necessary at retirement. We did all that. We talked about that, but it's impossible to talk about Social Security without touching all these other plans. In the show notes, in this video and the other 7 of them, is the financial plan for Tom and Susan. So you can go in there just on this video, you can pull it up and you can look through the whole thing that we prepared for them. Now, I want to emphasize to people, we do this in 50 states and the District of Columbia. We serve people all over the country. We're licensed in all those places, registered. We're good. And so if you're interested in one of these things, or you're interested in hiring us or consulting, we charge $1,000 for a basic financial plan or a comprehensive financial plan. And I'm just not offering this to everybody. We have some criteria. So, but I want to let you know is that don't let your geography stop you from consulting with us. We work with people all over the country. We do it by Zoom. So what we've got in the income plan, which is what we're doing today, is we've got 4 considerations. I mean, the income plan itself, but before we can create the income plan, we got to look at the investment plan. We got to look at how the money's invested, how it's going to go up and down, and the dividends that it produces and the gains, because that's what's going to create all the income, and how we manage risk. And then we got to look a little bit around the estate plan. And it's just, so now we're jumping into another area where we're going to be talking about estate planning, but it's only in terms of income. So if with Tom and Susan, one of them may pass away at 80 and the other one lived to 95. And so we got to plan, we got to look at what happens to the income when the first one passes away and what's the survivor or the widow left with. That's probably the biggest thing that we're looking at in the estate plan today in this video. And then the last section is the tax plan. Is, what it really boils down to is you can't spend tax money. So what we're going to do with clients when they come in is first we're going to figure out, what do you need to live on? I mean, what's your amount of money that you have to spend every month to live? Okay, and that's a number. And then with Tom and Susan, that was probably $5 or $6 grand a month. Okay, and then how much do you want to spend? Now we get beyond need and we get into want, and those 2 numbers added up to $10,500 a month after we did a bunch of work. But you'll notice what's not included in there are taxes, because you can't spend tax money to live. In other words, you got to pay taxes on your income to arrive at a net number. So we had to calculate the tax that Tom and Susan are going to have to pay to arrive at a net 10,500 a month that they can freely spend every month. Because 30 days later, there's going to be another 10,500 and so on and so forth. And then in the income plan, we adjust that by inflation of 2.5% each year for the rest of their lives. Okay. And so I'm just giving you a little peek into that. And so what Tom was saying is people come to us and say, can I retire? Do I have enough money to live? And I wish it was that simple. I wish we could just look at a few things and say, yeah. But in reality, that's all they want to hear. What we're talking about today is everything we do from the question to the yes or the no or the maybe or that we need to adjust some things. So jumping into the income plan, we build our income plan from the bottom up instead of the top down. And what I mean by that, when we ask people, well, how much do you need to live? When we ask them, because we have to, how much are you looking for in retirement? Well, people say 100 grand, you know, okay. So you say 100 grand, is that before or after tax? People say, make it before tax, and it's just, and if they say make it after tax, well, then you're really going to need 140 grand to pay the taxes. So what we're learning about this person is they haven't put a lot of thought into it. They definitely need to hire us, and we're going to get in here and we're going to get this down, because that's a top down approach. Is just give me a number on the top that I need, and then I'm going to show you all the taxes you're going to have to pay and how this is going to flow out to you. With our thing, we're going to start with you, create how much you need, how much you want, because you're not retiring without wants. I mean, most people want to travel, they want to do things in their leisure, maybe they want to get another house. I mean, there's all kinds of things. That's when you go to retirement, you want to spending your money. So need is here, and then wants is there, and we kind of make wants needs, and we're going to arrive at a number. Okay, so we've got that number, and now we're going to plan for that. So Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly the approach that we take. And I think it's a more useful thing because really what we're trying to do is look to see, okay, how much money do you want and need? Let's try to solve for that. And that's going to take X amount of your dollars, right? However much money you have, and we're going to dedicate that money to the income. That's going to leave the rest of the money available for other things like growth, sort of one off expenses, helping kids, charitable giving. I mean, we got some other things we could do with the other money. But I think approaching it from that way is let's solve for the income based off sort of the after tax number. We can help solve for the tax piece of that, right? That's part of what we're doing in our planning. But let's start with that number and then we work backwards from there, as opposed to, a common thing that gets thrown around is this 4% rule, which I think is not, it's a useful sort of guide to give you an idea of sort of what level of spending around about that you could afford based off your balance. But instead of starting with your total money and then trying to arrive at a number, let's start at what your actual spending is and what you want to spend, and we work backwards to solve for that. So that's sort of just the approach that we take. I think it's a better way to do it personally. But again, there's other ways to approach this. For Tom and Susan specifically, let's sort of get into the details here. Is they started, if you remember back to our Social Security video, is they made the decision to go ahead and file for Social Security right as Tom was retiring. It lined up with Susan's full retirement age. She gets the spousal benefit based off Tom's working history. We have a Social Security video. You can go back and watch that. But at the end of the day, what that was going to produce is $6,294 a month. Now that's gross. I'm working with gross numbers here. That is the amount from Social Security they're getting. That's well on their way to the 10,500, but it's not fully there yet, right? And again, we need to account for the taxes. And so when we sat down and looked at how much additional money would they need to be able to net after federal and state taxes the 10,500 amount, what we arrived at was about another 6,000 a month of gross income. So their gross income is going to be closer to, just over $12,000 a month. We net out the taxes, they can get the 10,500 and go on that way. So okay, how do we create this additional $6,000 a month? One way to do it is just leave the money invested like it is and make withdrawals of 6,000 a month out, which you could do. We have some clients who choose to go that way. The problem with that is it brings in risk, right? It brings in market risk, it brings in interest rate risk. Investments fluctuate, right? They go up, they go down, and when we're planning for the rest of your life, we don't know what the next 30 years look like, right? I mean, we might have a sense that it's going to go up over time, but any given year could be down. It could be down a lot. It could be flat. And at the meantime, we're still pulling out $6,000 a month, which could be risky. It brings in another risk called sequence of returns risk. Don't want to get too far into the weeds on that piece of it today, but if you Google it, you'll see that what that's talking about is it depends on, as you're living off the money, when those returns happen. Do the negative returns happen early? Do they happen later? Makes a difference in terms of sort of the ending balance. Again, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole. But what we decided for Tom and Susan is let's design a plan with the use of annuities, really designed to solve for that 6,000 a month, which again is going to net them the 10,500 they need. And what we ended up doing is recommending two separate annuities. One is called a SPIA. And let me bring up the show notes here, and you can solve. This is in the plan, so if you pull it up, you can read it. But this first annuity is designed to start paying income right when they retire, which in their case was October of 2026. And so we started with 6,000. We worked backwards. Said, okay, what company has the best rates for these 5-year SPIA? Again, this one's only going to pay for 5 years. I'll get to that in a second. American National happened to win then. It might not when we're doing the plan for you. We have software where we can quote all this out to see what makes the most sense. But really, what this one is designed to do is start creating income as soon as he retires to get them that additional $6,000 a month. For them, it took $316,000 of their IRA. Well, you can move it from an IRA to the annuity company. That is not a taxable event. That's a question I often get. So you're moving it from one IRA where it is now to an IRA with the annuity company, and then it sits there. And as the income comes out, as that 6,000 comes out, that's when the taxes are due. Typically, we just withhold the taxes off the check to net the amount they need. So that's annuity number one. Later on, I'll show you how that relates back to the software. You say, okay, that's great. That works for 5 years. What happens at the end of 5 years? Well, with this one, that annuity stops, right? So that payment's done. Well, that's where the second annuity comes into play. I'll go there for just in a second. One other thing I'll make a comment on this one is if both of them were to die during those 5 years, because we'll get this question too, is the beneficiaries would get the remainder of the 5-year payment. So someone is going to get 5 years worth of payments from this annuity. At the end of the 5 years, the income is done. But then in year 6, right after 5 years, this is where the second annuity comes into play. This one starts as soon as that one stops. Again, solving for 6,000 a month or 72,000 a year, and that then is guaranteed for the rest of both of their lives. And so that's going to cover as long as either one of them are living. They're going to get a check for $6,000 a month. And the real beauty of this type of annuity is it can create that 6,000 a month off a zero balance. So if you live long enough, as you start withdrawing money from this annuity, the account balance will eventually reach zero, right? If you live long enough. What's nice is that 6,000 will still continue coming in as long as either one of them is alive. If you left this in traditional investments and you started making $6,000 a month withdrawal out of it, and you add in poor performance on this piece of the money or not great performance, you would have the same issue. Eventually, it would run out. But in that scenario, the income stops. What's nice about this is the income continues and it goes on into the future. We'll probably get more into this, but I want to turn it back to Hans and see what comments he has on these right now.
Yeah, I mean, the gist of the income deal here is these people have about 1.8 million of money, plus they got a big Social Security check. Is that how can we guarantee that they're going to have an income for the rest of both of their lives? I mean, in all scenarios, one of them could die at 80 and the other one lived to 95. They could both live to 95. They could both live beyond that. And so we got a lot of things to think about when we're answering that question that I went on in the beginning. Do I have enough to retire? Well, it's going to depend on a lot of things. And for them, it was 10,500 a month is where we ended up with that they need to be able to spend for the rest of their lives. And then, then we got to increase that by inflation every year, 2.5%, and that's in the software. And that's quite a big number when you get out in your 80s and 90s. And so when we run that through, and we're going to show a Monte Carlo simulation without the annuities, I mean, certainly there's some scenarios where they'd be better off not buying the annuities. They'd be better off just investing all the money, pulling out the income. But there's also a number of scenarios without the annuities where they run out of money. And so what the annuities do is just provide them the guarantee that, look, I'm going to have a certain amount of money coming in, even if there's only one of us surviving, and that's guaranteed by an insurance company. It doesn't matter how long I live. So that's kind of our thinking. And so these folks have almost $6,300 a month in Social Security starting right when they retire. And then they also have these annuities, which is going to start right when they retire, $6,000 a month, guaranteed, no matter what happens. You know, they're going to be collecting checks, either two of them or one of them, for a long, long time. Those guarantees are just are great. So um, anyhow, so then we got withdrawals from qualified or non-qualified accounts. Then we get into the issue: are we, because initially we're going to have to take some money out of their investment account every month to make up the difference. And you're going to see that in the plan that Tom shows you. And then are we pulling that money out of the IRA, or are we pulling it out of the non-qualified account? And most likely we're pulling it out of the IRA. So that's an issue that we need to deal with. The annual inflation spending is inflation adjusted, that I already went over. The income tax is calculated on top of the 10,500 a month, so that, as I said, we build them from the bottom up. This plan is essentially going to account for their spending, and then inflation adjust that. And the last point that I want to make is this is a plan of the next 30 years. There's so many variables. Like, we're not guaranteeing that this is going to happen 30 years from now. We're simply projecting that with what we know. And I just want to make a point that this isn't going to be the last time we're going to see you. We're going to stay with you all the way through retirement. And every year, we're going to be making adjustments to this plan, maybe adjustments to your spending based upon how all this stuff turns out. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think plans, plan is really just a snapshot in time of where we are now and then looking forward, which is a helpful exercise. I think it's great. We do it. We do a lot. I think people get a lot of value out of it. But really, the value becomes in the implementation and then the updating and monitoring of the plan. Because at the end of the day, life happens, things change, things that we don't predict, and we need to be flexible enough to adjust that. And again, that's why the annuities are great, right? It removes any of the market risk. It has the income coming in guaranteed, which is wonderful. But we don't want to do it with all of your money, right? We need to have the rest of the money off to the side, still invested for growth, still doing other things, still liquid and access to it. So again, that's where building this as part of the larger plan makes some sense, because we sort of have solved for the income over here. We have the remaining money over here that we can invest. We'll get to the investment section in a second. That we invest that, and then we have flexibility with this piece of the money. So we're sort of putting these in different pots, doing different things, and that money has a job, right? This money's job is the income. This other's money job is the growth and sort of giving, or leaving money to the kids, estate planning, all that stuff. So when we think of the annuities as part of a larger investment plan, we'll get to the investments here, is we want to view those as like a fixed income substitute. So fixed income bonds, money market, stuff that's not going to have as high of a return, but provide some more stability or some more diversification away from equities. Annuities serve a very similar role to the bonds would in a larger portfolio. So when we think of the larger portfolio construction, if the annuities are serving as a bond allocation, that means we can take a little bit more risk, more equity exposure in the remaining money, which is going to have a higher expected return because we have our safety over with the annuities. And so let me show you, we have a section in the plan. I'll bring up the show notes here, that we get into the investment of the plan here. And so if you go back and watch our first video, they have about a 60-40 portfolio coming in, maybe 55-45, 55% equity, 45% fixed income. which they felt is appropriate for going into retirement, which I would tend to agree. That seems about right. Some people are a little bit more risk averse. They might have a little more equity or more bonds. Some people are okay with more risk. They might have a little bit more equity, but somewhere around there is a typical sort of asset allocation for someone in retirement. And so that's where they came in. They thought they were doing great. They weren't doing anything necessarily hugely wrong. But what we showed them is, okay, if we do the annuities, now we can be more aggressive with the other money, which is going to have more risk, it's going to have more volatility, but it's not impacting our income, right? Our income isn't being affected by that market movement. And over time, you would have a higher expected return with the remaining money because we have the income covered over here. And so, what this chart does is it really shows you sort of this purple line is what their current investments are, assuming they held it for this whole amount of time, going back to like 2021. The orange line is sort of the 80/20 allocation that we're recommending with the remaining investments. And you'll just notice, right? I mean, we have the full report in the appendix of the plan here, but you'll notice just the trend of it is it grows more, right? It makes sense. It's higher equity. You would expect it to grow more over time. There is more fluctuations, but the rest of that money is going to be invested for long-term growth, right? That's the money we're doing the Roth conversions with. That's the money we're doing everything else with. And so that's really what we set up for them. We have a video that we did separate from the series of videos where we really get into the weeds of how we approach the investment, sort of using the factor investing and different stuff. We have some language of that in the plan here. If we have time in this video, I might come back to this, but again, there's an approach that we do. We use primarily ETF index funds to create the portfolios with some sort of specificity with the factor investing. And that's really what is represented in the chart here. So I'm going to turn it back to Hans, and then once we'll let him comment on that. And then I'm going to bring us into the software and really show you how all this, interacts with each other.
Yeah. So the investment plan, I mean, what's up here at numero uno, is Tom already spoke to, is manages risk. Is we're going to sit down when we do a retirement plan for you, a comprehensive financial plan like we did for Tom and Susan. This is the first subject we're going to start on. How much risk are you taking? How much risk do you think you're taking? How much risk are you comfortable taking? And then we want to point out to you, as you get older and older and older, that number is going to go down. You're just going to be able to stomach less risk typically when you're 80 than you do at 68, like Tom is. So we need to have in the thinking all of those things that I just said. We do risk assessment tools and all that. But what Tom pointed out is because of the annuities, because that took such a chunk of their money to guarantee $6,000 a month for the rest of both of their lives, that then there's plenty of money left, and the plenty of money that's left is really their inflation piece, their protection piece, and then we could be more aggressive with that piece because we've got so much of it in guaranteed income. So, and what you'll find in the plan is they went to 80% equities, 20% fixed. So they went with a much more aggressive strategy, taking into account the guaranteed annuities. We also need to look at market risk, which is that going up and down. Longevity risk, that's reduced through annuities. Okay, is that when they put that money in those annuities, they've just taken market risk off the table. They're not totally off the table. There's an element to that of the market going up and down, but it's mostly off the table. And then, in addition, we've taken longevity risk off the table because that's what a lot of people are running out of money. They're concerned about. They don't know how long they're going to live. For that piece of the money, it just takes it off the table. Tom has already talked to you a little bit about factors and tilting our investment strategies. So we can be the managers of your money. We don't have to be the managers of your money. If you come to us with a financial plan, a lot of people say, I already got a financial guy. I'm a financial advisor. I'm happy with him. But a lot of times he or she's not giving them financial planning. They come to us, hire us. Many times they buy Medicare, they buy long-term care insurance, they buy annuities, and then they leave their money with their current financial advisor. A number of people come to us, that's on the table, and they end up moving their money to us for management. A lot of people are going to do that later in life, where they then are realizing that, when they can't do it, if they're people doing it themselves, We just kind of stand ready to do that piece. So the whole investment plan, what Tom is going to show you is the income plan, including the investment plan. Tom's going to take you into the software and show you where this all comes together.
Yeah, so we're going to go back through, and again, the very first video, we went pretty quickly through all the different software here for Tom and Susan, but I wanted to focus in sort of on this retirement section because this is really where it's running through the Monte Carlo simulations. Again, that's where it's running through 1,000 different scenarios with returns randomized, really to stress test sort of their plan is how many chances do they run out of money? Do they not? You'll notice their current plan, this is sort of where they were when they met us. It's not bad, right? I mean, they weren't in a situation that things were just really looking bleak and they were going to be really in trouble. But our goal is to try to improve upon that. So 98%, very good, no concerns over that. 100% is better, right? We'd like 100% over 98%. But what gets us to the 100%? Like, what changes do we make from the current plan to the proposed plan? All of these are sort of listed in the variables down here. One is an asset allocation. Again, the remaining investments that's not in the annuities going to 80/20. So that's an important. The tax strategy. So this is the Roth conversions. That's what we did in our last video where we looked at sort of what impact there. So that's brought into that. And then some big ones are down here. So the annuities, the SPIA is that 5-year annuity that comes in starting right in October, right when they retire. And then the deferred annuity, that's the one that starts once the 5-year one stops. So those are included there. And then when we look at the difference, right, when we add all of those changes in, we've increased the probability of success to 100%. And we've actually increased the ending balance. That's the projected ending balance of the portfolio. Again, the exact dollar amount I'm not so concerned about because the markets are going to fluctuate. Who knows where it's going to be? But when I compare one versus the other, if this one's higher than this one, I think that is helpful comparison to look at. So the dollar amount, I mean, I don't in any scenario think they're going to end up with exactly this amount, right? I mean, there's too many variables to actually know that. But when this one's higher than this one, it's like that. I like that direction. Directionally, it's helpful. So we got over 6 million, 100% with the annuities. When we look at the cash flows, again, this is where we look to see what does this look like on a year by year basis. So if we look at 2026, we got a partial year salary, right? Again, he was an MD making good money. He's retiring. And then we got Social Security starting a partial year that year in 2026. And then the annuity, a partial year in the annuity coming in 2026 as well. One thing I will point out when we have the annuities, there's one set of the annuities back on the long term care video we did where we purchased a long term care policy with 300,000 of IRA money. That's accounted for from an income standpoint because we need to make sure we're accounting for the taxes. We're not upending any Roth conversion strategy. So that's here, but this is not money that can really be spent. So don't view this as money that's spent. Really, the spendable money is the 72,000. Again, the first year is only 18,000 because they're only getting it from October through December. But then starting in 2027 for the rest of their life, they're getting 72,000 a year guaranteed forever. And so when we look at that back at the summaries, as we got 186,000 coming in, we have expenses of 166. The tax payment is a little bit elevated because of the Roth conversions. And actually, let me double check where we have the Roth conversions set right now. Yeah, let me put it back to where we actually recommended for them. Sorry about that. So now we'll go back to cash flows. Summary. So same thing. So we got the income coming in. We have this again. The tax payments a little bit higher because of the Roth conversions coming in, but then you'll notice it drops off. Once Roth conversions are done, it drops off pretty significantly. And so we have enough money to cover their spending, get them the 10,500 they need. Again, the expenses, part of the insurance. This is the long-term care. Those sort of offset each other. So when you do the math, the total spending is right at 10,500, which is what their goal was. That's after tax, and then we got to account for the taxes over here. So all of it sort of works out, flows through here. But at the end of the day, really what we're talking about here is guaranteeing their income, removing market risk, being more aggressive with the rest of the money, and the end result is a higher probability of success with a higher ending balance going to their kids, which they like, for them, that was important to them. And this just made a lot of sense. And so let me turn it back to Hans and see if he has any other comments here.
Yeah, we just try to give you a bird's eye view of the stuff we do behind the scenes, but then we meet with clients that we're doing a plan for 2 or 3 times or more during the making of the plan to show them the software and show them what we're thinking about recommending, get their input, get their reaction, so that by the time we get the plan completed, we're through all 7 things and these meetings, done all the calculation, then we're going to produce that plan where we're only going to give them one recommendation in each area. And then we're not through fiddling with it yet. I mean, when we present the plan, we have many people that we make adjustments after that before they start implementing. So, just trying to show you the process of building the income plan. I want to talk a little bit about estate planning, because all I want to do is mention that is when we're doing this income plan, I mean, we've got to take into account that one of them may pass away well before the other, and you're going to have a surviving widow or widower, possibly for a long period of time. And what happens? Well, the Social Security check there for Tom and Susan, it would go to $42.98 a month plus inflation. So the smaller Social Security check is going to stop. That's going to be a loss of income, and we got to account for that. The IRMAA brackets are going to cut in half. So what is 218,000 is the start of IRMAA for a married couple today is for a surviving spouse, that's 109,000. So IRMAA is effectively could be more than double. Then you got tax brackets are cut in half. So when you have a single, the 24% bracket is about 200,000, and you can see up here is 403,000 for a married couple. So if you got somebody on a Roth conversion strategy, and then one of the spouses dies, then we're going to have to finish that Roth conversion strategy at much higher tax rates, which may blow the whole thing up. So the annuity income, very importantly, is unchanged. That's one of the reasons we do that kind of annuity, because with all this other stuff going on that's bad, at least for the widow, that $6,000 a month is just going to be there, and it's going to continue on until the widow passes away. So that's the estate plan, and we're just kind of foreshadowing. The next video, we're going to be going over Tom and Susan's entire estate plan. And then we want to talk about the tax plan, just kind of as an afterthought, is the Roth conversion in Tom and Susan's plan is to keep them right below the IRMAA threshold. The income tax is calculated and paid after spending. I just wanted to go over the bottom up. So, we're building it from the bottom up. We're going to have that $10,500 a month, and then the tax is going to be on top of that. Ordinary income tax, capital gains tax, we got to deal with both of them in the planning. And then they're going to have 3 buckets of money. They're going to have taxable, where they're paying current taxes, but they already paid tax on the principal. You're going to have tax deferred, and that's money that we're not currently paying taxes on, but we will in the future if we take anything out of it. And then you have tax free, which is the Roth and any life insurance that they own. In Tom and Susan's case, I don't think they have that. And then managing tax brackets year by year. I just want to make out the point that we're going to project all this stuff out for 30 years. And really, the first couple years, 2026 and 2027, we're pretty much going to stick with. But every November after that, we're going to be looking at what we already know in January to November. And then we're going to look at what we said we're going to do for the year, and we're going to make adjustments. And we're going to do that all the way through retirement. So just kind of putting a cap on things, we talked about IRA 401k today. We haven't really talked about long-term care, but baked into their plan is the expense and the moving of money of that that IRA funded long-term care. We talked about IRMAA, and then we certainly talked about taxes. We're talking about estate planning, and we're talking about the estate planning of the financial plan that we're doing for Tom and Susan. And this is the 7th episode. We've gone over all the worries, and we're one away from finishing. So, Tom, why are we doing this video today?
Yeah, we're doing this video because in my experience, most people who come in have never thought of an estate plan. They don't have a plan in place. And to the extent that they say they have something, all they say is, oh, we have a will. And then that's it, right? And that's not enough, right? We need you to think through not only what happens at death, but what happens for the surviving spouse, right? When we're doing estate planning, that's our first spot is we need to plan. If you're married, we need to plan for what happens when the first one passes, and we don't know which one that's going to be. So we'll get into more of the details as we go along, but you really need to have a plan for the surviving spouse, and then eventually where you want all the assets to go, how you want them to get to who you want them to go to. So let me bring up the show notes. You can find these at the link below our video. They're also on our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board, and then like we've done in all of the other series of the seven, we're in the seventh of eight of these videos, we have the actual plan that we did for Tom and Susan go through, where there's a section towards sort of the back of the plan where we walk through some of the documents, estate planning documents. We'll get to that a little bit later in the show, but that's where in the plan we've actually addressed it for Tom and Susan. We'll get into that as we go. So let me turn it back to Hans. We'll get going through sort of piece by piece and really lay you out what things you need to think about from estate planning, and then specifically what we recommended for Tom and Susan.
Okay, so Tom and Susan. Tom is 67. Susan is 66. Tom is retiring in October of 2026, so it's pretty soon. They have 2 adult children, 2 grandchildren, and they've been married for 41 years. And mostly Tom is a MD. He's retiring, like I said, and Susan does not have a big Social Security earnings account because she hasn't worked other than when they first got out of college. So, we got into the Social Security video. We talked about them, and we've been through all the different videos beforehand that you may want to go back and watch or haven't been following the series. But today we're looking at what type of estate planning have we done for them as part of this whole comprehensive plan. And where we start, and we start in the same place with everybody when we get to estate planning, is we want to find out, like, do you have any specific bequests in mind? Or have you already done some estate planning that is going to go to somebody other than the spouse? So, and people are all over the board on this, is that very few people come to us and they say, oh yeah, I'm going to leave this to my son, or I'm going to leave this to my daughter, or, but some do. And so we want to know about those things first. And then we want to have a discussion. Do you have a desire to do that? And we kind of want to know in the ultimate state, because that's going to, and then we're going to ask them, okay, so is this money or thing or item going to pass to your adult children? Is that going to happen at the first death of the 2 of you, if we're talking to a couple, as in Tom and Susan's case, or is that going to happen after the second death? And that's usually stumps people, because they say, I always wanted my son to have this, or I always wanted my daughter to have this. Okay, or my grandchildren. But is your surviving spouse, which we don't know which one of the 2 of you that's going to be, and this was the case with Tom and Susan, is they really started looking at this and they said, no, we're not going to pass much to our children until both of us are gone. And that makes our work easier than people that say, no, we want to pass this to our kids and we want to give it to them when the first one of us dies. Well, then that's going to take away from the surviving spouse. And then, Tom, you may want to come in at this point and just talk a little bit about which you brought up about second marriages, which is actually not Tom and Susan.
Yeah, so this isn't specific to Tom and Susan, but where we run into a lot of this, where it becomes an issue, is when we have a couple that's in their second marriage, they have children from a previous marriage, and they've always thought along, it's like, I'll leave all my money to my kids that were not my spouse's kids, right? It's her stepkids. So I'll talk of it as the husband saying this. I want to leave the money to my kids, and my wife will be okay. When we start doing the planning, we might recognize, like, you can't afford to do that. Like, in your wife is not going to be okay without the money going to her. And so there's tension here, right? It's because they want the money to go to their kids from a previous marriage, but they can't afford to leave it all to them because they need to take care of their spouse. Life insurance is a great solution to help solve some of that, right? Whether we leave the life insurance to the spouse or the life insurance to the kid, at least we have money going to whichever party we want to so we can solve some of those goals. But second marriages become complicated very quickly, especially if they're more recent second marriages, right? If you got married, 20 years ago and your kids have a good relationship with your new spouse, that's not typically as difficult. But marriages later in life where the kids really don't have the relationship with the new spouse, it gets hairy pretty quickly, and we need to sort of figure out how we can manage all that. And you might not be able to afford to leave it to the kids without going leaving it to the spouse. And that again gets to the idea in this whole video is the first step in this estate planning that we're doing for a lot of our clients is making sure the surviving spouse is okay. And then once that's taken care of, we get to sort of the next generation.
Yeah, and by the way, most people are okay with that. I mean, they come in here, especially Tom and Susan. I mean, it was just all about, they were asking, can I retire? Do we have enough money to retire? Can we maintain our lifestyle? And the answer was a resounding yes. And if you've been following this series, you can see that we've helped them do it, managing taxes and Social Security checks and planning for long-term care, just doing all those things. But yes, you can retire. But then the subsequent planning, which is estate planning, is when the first one of you dies and the other one lives on, especially if that is in your 70s, and then the other one lives till the 80s or 90s, now you've got a surviving spouse that we're planning for 10 or 20 years. And most of the time, especially people that have been married for 41 years, that's the first thing that's on their mind is, how is my wife going to be left if I go? Or vice versa. The wife is, how is my husband going to be left if I die soon or 10 years from now and he lives for 20 more years? And so that's where we get this typically, and it was in Tom and Susan's case, the biggest concern. And let's talk about some of those issues. So as soon as a person passes away, whether it's the husband or the wife, and in Tom and Susan's case, Tom's Social Security check is like $4,300 a month now. Susan's is like $2,000 a month now. And so as soon as the first death happens, the $2,000 that Susan was getting stops. And the survivor of the two of them are going to get the $4,200. So there's a $2,000 loss of income. IRMAA threshold is now $109,000, where it was $218,000. Now it'll be more in the future with inflation, but let's just deal with today numbers. That's a big thing where people in Tom and Susan's plan, they're setting their Roth conversion threshold right under that 218,000, so they don't pay IRMAA, but they still do Roth conversions. And then all of a sudden, one of them passes away. The survivor goes on with a $109,000 threshold. We're going to have to rethink a lot of things. RMDs, they're at the single tax brackets. So again, like in their plan, they are taking the RMDs at 73, and they're going to take them for the rest of their life. And it's not a problem for them because they need to live off of their money. But we also are doing some Roth conversions to lessen RMDs, and we're doing all that around that $218,000 IRMAA threshold. And married couple tax brackets, they're going to go to the single tax bracket. Then their POA on the documents that they've completed, there are each other's power of attorney and healthcare power of attorney. So when the first one dies, the surviving spouse no longer can use their spouse that's now deceased as the POA. So these POAs need to be written that the next child steps in and functions as the POA. And then home health is much more difficult. There's a lot of older people who one of them's sick and one of them's healthy, and the healthy one takes care of the one who's not well. And they, when you're dealing with the surviving spouse, you lose your caregiver, and it's become a solo agent. So these are the issues at the surface that we just want to deal with. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think, related to these issues, first step is just making sure they have enough income, right? I mean, their income is going to be cut, if not only by Social Security, but one of the checks is going away, right? Which is going to be impactful depending on the size of the various checks, right? And everyone's situation is different. In the planning for Tom and Susan, like they have annuities to help create some additional income. so that they can afford to have that reduction in one of the checks. But some people, that's a really impactful moment, right? They've lost the check. They're now at the higher tax brackets. They could wake up one day and have less take home pay than they did. I mean, that's very natural, right? So they have less income and higher taxes and potentially higher IRMAA. It's really difficult, right? So we need to make sure things are set up that way. And then, again, related to that is we're looking at tax brackets, we're looking at the IRMAA brackets. The one thing that a lot of people miss, right, and when we start bringing up Roth conversions, and we have a previous video where we talked about that, and we'll get to the tax planning on the next video too, is some people come back and say, I don't want to pay taxes now. I don't want to go into these higher tax brackets. I don't want to do this, which is okay for the short term, but it's very short term thinking, right? When we start looking at long term, what impact happens when the first spouse passes? And I see it every day where we have a spouse who's died, the surviving spouse is coming in, they're in a crisis mode because their spouse just passed away, understandably, and now they're trying to figure out what to do for income. And then we start showing them what the tax implications are, and it blows them away, right? They just are not prepared for that. And IRMAA is this one of these sneaky ones that hits you 2 years later, and it's really frustrating. So again, we need to think through a lot of that, set things up now in preparation for that. And again, that's where a lot of the estate planning starts with when we're doing these plans here.
Yeah. So this is the big deal in a lot of the plans we're doing is we want to make sure that person who survives the couple or the survivor, especially if it's going to go on for a number of years, is okay. Yeah. We talked about the change in Social Security, the change in IRMAA, long-term care. We haven't talked about that too much, but now they're solo and they're going to need to have the policy set up for that. RMDs are affected. The tax brackets that you're paying taxes on those RMDs, their income, they've had a loss of income. And then this is the topic today is estate planning. So all of these affected, and then taxes generally go up on a single, the widow's tax. So now we want to talk about what they do with the attorney. And we led them to an attorney. They happen to live in North Carolina, which is where we're located. So we have an attorney that is right in our office, and that's only good for people in North Carolina that we can utilize. But we also have a law firm that works in about 24 states. And if you're in one of those 24 states, we can line you up where they're in sync with us and the financial plan. And if you want to use your own attorney, your own estate planning attorney, we coordinate with them to give them our piece of the financial advice and really our recommendations in the estate plan. So this is what Tom and Susan, they didn't have all this stuff laid out. They hadn't messed with it since their kids were little. And so the basic 4 documents, the durable power of attorney, and by the way, power of attorney ends when you die. So in other words, if Tom made Susan his power of attorney, and when Tom is deceased, she's no longer the power of attorney for him. She's the surviving spouse, but a durable for all financial things. You want your spouse to have that in case you get dementia, and now she can sign things for you, whereas that's not really the right thing to do for RMDs and that kind of thing. So you need a durable power of attorney, and you need one of your children, one of your adult children, as the number 2. The durable healthcare power of attorney, and that is just simply, it's different than the financial power of attorney. It's just for healthcare decisions, making a deal with the doctor, setting up a home healthcare agency, just all things medical. An advance directive or living will, and a last will and testament. And the last will and testament, everybody knows what that is. A lot of people don't have it. They had it, but some updating was necessary. We just started all over. And in their case, we are recommending a revocable living trust for a couple of reasons, but mainly because one of their adult sons, they're concerned about his handling of money, okay? The responsibility around money, and especially if death of both of them occurred early, in other words, in the next few years, they're just concerned that he would come into all this money and he wouldn't use it appropriately. So that's one of the reasons for the revocable living trust. It also works very well with real estate because there's no beneficiary, at least in North Carolina. Some states have a beneficiary deed. So by putting their house in a revocable living trust and a few of their other assets, they can avoid probate and have things pass appropriately at their death. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, so these are sort of the list of documents that we recommend most people have. The trust sometimes, sometimes not, depending on the situation. But certainly the power of attorneys are important. The will is important. The advance directive, again, really giving your wishes. And really that's helpful for your family. And I went through this with my family. It's like when someone is in the hospital, they're very sick, and you're having to make tough decisions, families start fighting, right? There's disagreements on what mom or dad wants. There's not clarity there. Really, that advance directive takes some of that burden off of your kids who are having to make these tough decisions if you laid out kind of what your wishes are. So I think that's an important piece of that. One thing that I want to point out is when you have, and this is something that a lot of people miss, is when you have beneficiaries listed on the account. So think of your IRAs, your 401ks, any insurance policies you have, all of them will have named beneficiaries. That happens prior to the will. That supersedes the will. That it doesn't matter what the will says. If the beneficiary says one thing, that's what's going to happen. And so sometimes I've seen sort of really bad situations where we're reviewing accounts, we're doing a plan for a couple, and they've listed an ex-spouse and they've just left them as the beneficiary on the account. And I point that out. They say, "Oh, it's okay. I have a will. The will says something else." And I have to let them know it doesn't matter what the will says. The beneficiary is going to happen first. And so I want you, if you're watching this video, if nothing else, I want you to check your beneficiary designations on all your accounts to make sure they're in line with what your wishes are. Because once you've died, you can't change it, right? I mean, that's something that's in place at death. It freezes, and it's going to happen, whatever says on there. And then another piece of, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, things that don't always have beneficiary designations, you can go to them and add what's called a POD, or some places call it TOD, payable on death or transfer on death. And it acts just like a beneficiary, right? So it passes outside of the will, it goes directly to them. And anything that passes through beneficiary designation is going to happen quickly. It's not going to go through the probate process. It's going to be pretty smooth. And so one of the general goals that we have in a lot of the estate planning we're doing is having things pass to who we want them to go to in the smoothest way possible. We're really trying to limit the headaches that your kids, if that's who the beneficiaries are going to have when they're dealing with sort of these accounts here. And so the will is important. I don't think you should ignore the will. To me, though, it's sort of this catch-all document that makes sure that if anything got missed, if there was no beneficiary designation, if there was no payable on death, at least we have the will that is in line with what our wishes are to make sure it all gets to the right spot. But anything we can have pass outside the will is certainly going to be a smoother process. It's going to happen more quickly. It's not going to be tied up in the courts. And sometimes families just need liquidity, right? When someone dies, unfortunately, it just takes money to bury a loved one, to arrange all of those things. And so, having access to cash quickly is going to be important.
Now, the last piece that I want to go over here is federal estate taxes. So Tom and Susan have a net worth of over 4 million, short of 5 million, which is a lot of money, but it's not near the threshold of the federal estate tax. Is 15 million is the threshold. So most people that we deal with are not under the federal estate tax. And a lot of them don't really know whether they're in that or not. And the benefit of this planning is they learn they don't have to worry about it. Now, some states do have an inheritance tax with a much lower threshold, some of them as low as $1 million. Now, for these couples' case, because they live in North Carolina, there is no inheritance or estate tax for the state taxes in North Carolina. But I just wanted to bring that point up is the big problem for people like Tom and Susan is the pent up taxes in the 401k and IRA is that if both of them were to die in the next few years, there's a substantial money in the IRA. The adult children are going to inherit it and they're going to have a problem. We have a lot of other videos on that. So we want to make sure that you understand that federal estate taxes are really not a thing for people that are under 15 million. And then secondly, where there is a problem with taxes, it's usually in the IRA. And one final note, do not leave your IRA to the trust. You want to leave your IRA typically to the beneficiaries directly, because it's going to avoid a big tax bomb after you pass away. Now, today, we're wrapping her up with tax planning. So, Tom, why are we doing this video today?
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this video because taxes, they touch everything in this planning that we're doing with them. It's an important piece to consider. And I think if we were to really get down to it, most people, they hire us around sort of the tax planning we're doing as part of the financial planning. Um, because at the end of the day, the more taxes you pay, the less you get to keep. And the whole thing of retirement is having money to live. I do want to caution you, and John Hans will talk about this some, is it doesn't need to be the main focus, right? If you come in and your only focus is on taxes and minimizing taxes, sometimes you miss the big picture. We'll get to some stories here as we go through the video. That's why we put it last. That's why it's the seventh of the seventh worries, is we want to put that appropriately, is we want to do the other planning and then overlay the tax planning on top and not start with the tax planning first. So we'll sort of get into more of that as we go through the video. Let me bring up the show notes here. You can find these below the link on our video. They're also at our website at cardinalguide.com. We have the board like we've had in the previous 8 videos, and then the plan that we did for Tom and Susan. If you read through the plan, you'll notice that taxes are addressed kind of along the way. There's IRMAA, there's Social Security taxes, Roth conversions, QCDs, things like that. So there's stuff all throughout the plan about taxes. I'm going to put it back to Hans here, and we're going to go sort of worry by worry and just talk about where the taxes impact that particular worry.
So, just want to tell a little funny here in the beginning is that why are taxes last if they're such a priority? I mean, you go through the 7 worries, and taxes are at the last. And when new clients come in and we're interviewing them to bring them in as clients, we go over their Social Security, their Medicare, blah, 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 blah. And we talk about them and apply the knowledge that we have and ask questions about their situation. And it's the very end of the discussion, we talk about taxes. And people that come in that are looking for tax shelters and they're angry about taxes and they see me as the tax reduction guy tend to annoy me. Okay. And it leads, tax planning in isolation leads to poor decisions. You get involved in investments that are not appropriate. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about all this other stuff first, and then we're going to talk about taxes. And in reality, each one of these has a tax implication. And so when you watch the other 7 episodes about Tom and Susan and the plan, we've talked about taxes all along. And so today we're just going to go back and we're going to start in and talk about the tax implications. We're going to start with Social Security. And a lot of folks are not aware, but there are income taxes on Social Security. And there's a lot of folks that think that those were eliminated by the One Big Beautiful Bill last year, and they weren't. I mean, there was a provision in there for the senior tax provision where you get like $6,000 deduction each, or a married couple $12,000, and that has income limits, and that was intended to rebate your Social Security tax, income tax, but they're still there. And the way they're calculated, they're either going to be nothing. So people that only have Social Security and they don't have other taxable income, they're really not going to pay any taxes. They just have their whole Social Security check and they got to live on that. People that have other income, which we highly recommend, and even if it's a small amount of income, they're not going to pay that much tax. Now, in Tom and Susan's case, they have an income, especially with the Roth conversions, right up to the IRMAA threshold. They're going to pay some taxes on their Social Security. And, we've done other videos on that where we go in and do a mock-up tax return and show you that somebody that a 200,000 income level with about, which they have about $80,000 a year in Social Security, how much income tax they're actually going to pay. Just understand that this is taxable for high income people. Jumping down to Medicare, with Medicare planning, the big thing is where the tax comes in is with IRMAA. the income related monthly adjustment amount, the Medicare tax. And the threshold for that is 218,000 of modified adjusted gross income. And they use your income 2 years ago. So a little confusing. There's appeals and all that kind of stuff. We have other videos that we can teach you. In Tom and Susan's case, we did their Roth conversion planning. Ultimately, they ended up keeping themselves below this threshold, um, really pretty much out into the years, and they really could get all the Roth converting that they wanted to get done and still not pay IRMAA. And then long-term care insurance benefits are tax-free. I mean, in the long-term care section, there's a lot of folks that are self-insured or they're self-funded and they pay their own long-term care. That's the plan out of their wealth. And that's an acceptable plan. But when you actually plan that out, when a lot of them, they look at that and we help them with that, is that if you have a big income need when you're 80 years old or 85, which is paying for long-term care, you're going to, and if you have to draw that money out of your IRA, which a lot of people are going to do, you're going to have to draw it out, pay the taxes, be left with enough. There's a big tax implication there. You buy long-term care insurance, you buy it the right way. If you have a need for long-term care, those benefits are going to come to you tax-free, and that's a big consideration. It's why Tom and Susan purchased it. And now I want to push it to Tom to talk about 401k and IRA.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're doing planning, the IRA and the 401k presents the sort of the biggest opportunity for tax planning in most plans that we're doing, because that's where a lot of people's savings are. And this might be you, right? You saved a lot of money in your 401k through, payroll deductions and your employer match, and you've been disciplined there, and you have this pot of money, which is great. But now we got to owe taxes on this, right? I'm talking specifically about traditional money, the not Roth accounts. And so what a lot of we're doing is looking to see how do we get this money out of the IRA, out of the 401k at the best tax rate possible. Now, that's not necessarily in that individual year, right? I mean, we want to look at it over the life of the plan, not just any given year, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to look at. It's minimize your lifetime taxes, not this year's taxes. Before we get into the example with Tom and Susan, I'll sort of give you sort of a cautionary tale. And this is, I'm thinking of one set of clients, but I could name, 10, 15, 20 clients that meet this exact scenario. Is they were going along, they retired at 65, they learned about IRMAA, right? So they didn't like that. And so then they spent their whole, the rest of their 60s and early 70s trying to avoid IRMAA. So we're doing Roth conversions, we're pulling money out, but we're limiting ourselves up to that 218 limit, which in Tom and Susan's case was actually fine, right? And I'll show you the model in a second. But for other people, if you have more money in the IRA, it's caused a problem because now the client's coming in, they're turning 73, they have these RMDs happening, and they don't have a choice to take it. And it's pushing them into the IRMAA brackets, and that's going to be the case for the rest of their lives. So they spent the first, I don't know, 8 years or so of their retirement avoiding IRMAA to pay IRMAA for the rest of their lives. And now they're sort of waking up and realizing that there was short-term kind of thinking, right? So let's avoid it this year because we don't want to pay it. But they didn't really consider what happens when RMDs take place. So when we're doing planning, I just want you to take the long picture approach, the long-term approach, and that might mean paying more now to avoid higher ones later. So with that sort of note, let me bring up sort of Tom and Susan's example. Again, this is in the plan, but I'm going to take us back into the software that we did some other videos on earlier in this series. Just as a quick reminder, these are the accounts that Tom and Susan have. They have about 1.8 between Tom and Susan, just a little under that in traditional IRA money. They had been doing some Roth conversions, so about 500,000 in Roth money, which is great. And then they also have some money in a taxable brokerage account, or what we would consider in the industry a non-qualified account, along with some cash. So that's sort of where their money is currently. There's more stuff. We're not going to go through every screen in the software, but one area that we're going to spend some time on today is this tax tab. And this is where we can really start projecting what their tax bill is going to be if they do Roth conversions or if they don't. Ultimately, what we recommended for Tom and Susan is to do Roth conversions up to the point that they avoid IRMAA. But that was not always the case, right? We worked with them to find where they were comfortable with, and I'll show you an alternative option that some people you might be considering as well. And so what we're looking at here on this chart is this blue shaded area. So I'll get rid of the green for a second. This blue shaded area is what their projected taxable income is going to be if they don't do any Roth conversions. So he's got a high income now, he's retiring, they're starting Social Security, and they're sort of going along, right? And then RMDs start at 73, they sort of go along here, and they're just kind of going to the future. So they're sort of managing it along the way. Not too bad, right? There's not a huge spike in taxes. That's one of the things I look at is, do we have a big spike in RMDs down the future? I'm not going to show it today because I don't want to spend too long on here. Where this really looks different is if I modeled one of them dying earlier. Right now, the model has both of them living to 95. In reality, one of them will probably die sooner than that, if not both of them. And there could be a prolonged period of time with one spouse filing taxes at a single tax filing rate. That's that widow's tax that we've talked about in the videos. And so that's really a big driver of why we're considering Roth conversions for them. And so then what I can do in the software is say, okay, we know that we want to do some Roth conversions. Then the question is how much? And so I have different various levels I can play around with. One of the important things, and again, I don't want to get too far in the details here, but we're assuming a terminal tax rate of 30%. Essentially, think about that is how much money would my kids have to pay on money that was left in a traditional IRA? 30% might be lower than actuality, but again, that's the number we're using for their plan. That kind of assumes if we don't do Roth conversions and there's money left in a traditional IRA, how much would the kids pay on that traditional IRA money? 30%. And so what we've done here is say, okay, let's convert up to the point of no IRMAA. So again, in 2026, that's 218,000 for a married couple. That is modified adjusted gross income, not necessarily taxable income. Those are different numbers. So we're looking at modified adjusted gross income, trying to keep that below. Granted, their income this year impacts their Medicare price 2 years from now, in 2028. We don't know what the 2028 IRMAA levels are, so we're going to use the 218 number that we do know, just to make sure we have some cushion there. But you'll see this green shaded area is what that looks like. So they're converting some, not huge amounts, but some over these next several years. But then you see it drop off, right? You see their income drop off, or that bar drop off. That's really demonstrating that what's being converted, we're done, happens in sort of their early 80s or so. So we're doing it over a longer period of time, but it's avoiding IRMAA, which they didn't like, and we're getting money over into the Roth account based off a lot of assumptions. And so we don't pay attention to this exact number real closely. Like, I mean, their exact savings is probably going to be different than this number. I don't think it will play out exactly like this. But directionally, when I'm comparing strategies against each other, I think it can be a helpful tool to look at. So again, at least in the projection, this is showing by doing the Roth conversions, their overall worth that's going to their inheritance to their kids is going to be better off to the tune of 522,000 to the positive, right? They have more money, more wealth, after tax wealth going to their kids, which was important to them. When I'd referenced this earlier, because we had played around with some different thresholds, and this again during the planning is a collaborative approach to see what makes sense. Is we looked at converting to the top of the 24%. There's a lot of plans that's what we're recommending because it's a very wide bracket. We can get a lot of money converted and still staying within the 24% rate. It does bring in some IRMAA cost, right? So that was the downside to doing that. But again, it's a lot more aggressive approach to Roth conversions. And these lines here are the different tax brackets. So the yellow line is the 22%, the orange line is the 24%. So at the 24%, we convert a lot more quickly, get it done, and then we have very low taxes sort of the rest of their life. So benefit of that is we really don't have much of an RMD problem at all because the conversions are done before their RMDs start. And then we get to live in low tax rates into the future. I like this strategy if we're concerned or if you're concerned about higher tax rates in the future, right? We think about an election cycle coming up in 2028. Who gets elected? Do they change tax rates? I mean, again, we don't know. But if that's a concern, possibly a faster conversion strategy makes sense. If you had more money in a traditional IRA than Tom and Susan, we probably would need to be more aggressive than the IRMAA level to make a difference, right? That the example I told you that's not Tom and Susan where they've delayed it. That's kind of their problem is they have too much in their IRA. They should have been converting a lot more because now they're facing a RMD problem causing IRMAA issues. So there's a lot of nuance here. It's very customized to your plan. But for Tom and Susan, we showed them both. You'll notice this number is actually a little bit higher at the 24% rate, but not significantly. Like they're in the same range. And so what they decided and what we ended up putting in the plan is just to convert up to the point of no IRMAA. So again, I could spend all day talking about taxes and tax planning and stuff. You don't want to listen to me for too much longer on this. But again, this is some of the software we're using. It's some of the way we approach the planning on the Roth conversion piece specifically. And a lot of the planning, a lot of people who hire us, that's really where their interest is how do we do this? How do we control this and make this the right way? This does lead back in, and I'm going to turn back to the board here, but it does lead back into the fifth worry. And again, I'm going to tell you sort of another cautionary tale here. And so the fifth worry is income. And income is related to Roth conversions and taxes. As you convert money to a Roth, that's taxable income. It starts crowding out room from the tax brackets. And I think that again, this is why we don't want to start with the tax planning. We want to do this tax planning, secondary to sort of their income planning. Is I've had another client, this is not Tom and Susan, but another client come in and they were sold on Roth conversions. They loved the idea and they were going to convert as much as possible, which is, I'm not opposed to. I think it's a good idea. Except what they were doing is they were limiting what they were spending out of their IRA. They were only living off their Social Security, which they could manage because they had lived, paid off all their debts and had very low expenses. But they weren't taking the trips that they told us they wanted to do. They weren't helping their kids. Again, another goal that they told us that they were interested in. And the main reason they weren't doing any of that is say we can't create more income because we're doing all this tax planning. And so what we like to do as part of the planning is we like to start with the income and build it from the bottom up. So our first focus is getting you the income that you need to live comfortably, and not just your base income, but also including the stuff you want to do, right? We want to take trips, we want to travel, we want to see the grandkids, whatever it is. Let's make sure we have the income to do that stuff. Once we've solved for that, now we look at sort of the tax planning and say, okay, how much room do we have left in terms of the tax brackets that we're managing? And that's when we do the Roth conversion. So taking it back to Tom and Susan here is they know they wanted to spend about $10,500 a month was their goal. They had Social Security, which didn't cover all of that. And so we added some income annuities to bridge the gap to get to them to that 10,500, which is taxable income that was funded out of their traditional IRA, those annuities. So that filled up some of those tax brackets. And then we look to see, okay, now that we have our income covered, we've done all these other things, how much room do we have left to do the Roth conversions up to that IRMAA level? And that's how we built out sort of the tax plan for them. And I think that's a better approach to do it as opposed to starting with, let's do all the conversions we can. Let's cut back on our spending to do more Roth conversions. I think that's a bad way to approach it. So again, I'm going to turn it back to Hans here, see if he has any other comments or if he wants me to show anything else here.
Well, with them, it was actually pretty simple. They told us how much money they wanted to spend. We made some adjustments in that every month, and we put inflation on that. And we started with that, and then we calculated, okay, to produce that, how much tax is that going to produce? We added on top of that. So then we looked at that and we said, okay, so you can retire. But then in came the Roth conversions because that number was below where they could stand, which was the IRMAA threshold. So then we put into the software a certain amount of Roth conversion, and that spread them out over about 15 years of Roth conversions. That's just number step. But the priority in this is the income plan. The priority is the bottom up, is looking at their spending first. That works for them. So moving on to estate planning. With Tom and Susan, again, one of them may not live to 90 or 95. One of them may be gone at 75 or 80 or 85. And the other one lives on for a lot of years. That's the widow's tax. This is that you go from you go from married filing jointly tax rates. It's like 410,000 is the top of the 24%, or 420,000, something like that. That cuts in half the top of the 24% bracket for a widow or widower is 210,000, where they're filing as a single taxpayer. So that's a big deal that we need to plan for, and we need to demonstrate to people if there's an early passing what that's going to do to all the planning. The 10-year rule on the IRA, so when they're both gone, if it's not, it's going to be on the Roth or the traditional IRA. When their kids inherit the money at the end, the IRA money, they have 10 years to empty it. Much better a Roth because they're not going to pay any taxes on the emptying. If it's a traditional IRA, the kids are going to have 10 years to empty it, and they're going to have to pay taxes. So they're going to have to be real smart about their distributions. And in Tom and Susan's case, they have that son who they think is going to squander the money. And so, a trust was the answer for that. Although we're not putting the IRA in a trust. So more on that in other videos. Charity was important to them, is important to them, and we're going to use QCDs to make their charitable giving once they reach 70 and a half, or at least when Tom does. And then the Roth inherited at zero tax is just to point out that there's, the Roth, you still have the 10-year rule on the Roth, the kids do, but to empty it, but they're not going to be paying any taxes on that, which is huge. And the last worry that we're going over is taxes. That's the whole show. And I just wanted to make one specific point, is tax planning makes you money or earns you money or saves you money. Tax preparation, which we don't do tax preparation, that costs you money. So as financial planners, estate planners, retirement planners, we do tax planning, and then we don't do tax preparation. So I wanted to make that distinction. This is the finale where we're done with Tom and Susan. And what we've done is gone over each one of these 7 worries and boxes, applied them to them, but that's not where the real benefit is to them, is in each one of these worries, when we're addressing it and we come up with a solution, it knocks, it creates taxes, it has estate planning implications, it has income implications. So it's really the mixture of all the decisions and then bouncing a decision against all the other 6 worries and then going back and remaking the decision. That's where the software is real helpful to arrive at one synchronized plan. So I want to bring Tom back on. I'm Hans Scheil.
And I'm Tom Griffith.
And we thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.